If you're building a no-code app on Bubble, this is the video that's going to help you go from start to finish. In it, we're covering things like what you can and cannot do on Bubble, how to build a custom scalable app, actual development walkthroughs that you can apply to your own app, responsiveness in making your app work on any screen size, and more. I'm Gabby Roman, co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we've been helping entrepreneurs launch no-code apps that have helped them grow seven-figure businesses, start new streams of revenue, or simply develop a new set of valuable skills and everything in between. This video is your masterclass on launching no-code apps on Bubble. Stick around the whole way through because we're going to be breaking down best practices around using the platform and showcase how creative you can actually get in your own development. Make sure to bookmark this video because you can apply these principles to your own app and refer to the video as you do so. Let's start by understanding what the Bubble platform is. On Bubble, you can build custom web applications all without code. You do not need to have a technical background to build a full scalable app. And you have complete control over every aspect of that app, how it looks to your front end users, the designs of your pages, how your database is structured. So all of the information that is being stored to the application and how it's used, how it's searched. You also have control over all of the logic in between. So it's up to you to create all of the functionality, bring it to life so that it is a highly interactive experience for your users that is custom to your needs. Now, all of this is going to happen through visual programming, which means that you do not need to have a technical background to build an app. You are not going to be writing lines of code. Instead, you're going to be dragging and dropping all of the components to bring your app to life. This is the front-end designs, the way that it looks to your users, and also all of the logic behind the scenes to really make it more interactive. Okay, and before you ask, yes, you can absolutely create robust applications, enterprise-level productions with drag and drop visual programming. It's really up to you to put together the right combination of things with the best practices and strategies to ensure that it's going to be scalable for the long term. This platform is not just for mock-ups or first versions or prototypes. You can actually build full-fledged businesses on this platform. It's just all in how you structure the data. It's how you put together your logic, following a lot of best practices. And we'll talk about those throughout this video. Now, over here, I have a few different types of common applications broken down into different categories of what works best on this platform, what's just okay. In other words, you can build them on Bubble, but there are some things to consider. And then what types of applications you'll want to use a different system for. This is to give you a sense of what is possible on this platform and how you can mix and match different types of features to create a custom experience. So let's start with the types of applications that are really great for this platform. Anything that's really data-driven and has users interacting with each other where they need to create an account and log in and maybe provide some data, update statuses, be able to search through data in some way. That's a very, very common type of functionality for Bubble apps. So marketplaces are huge. So connecting users with each other, being able to put up listings, book services with each other, purchase things from each other. You can absolutely do that. You can also integrate with the payment gateway so that users can pay each other. You can take a fee out of that. Lots of ways to construct a marketplace. Social networks, also very popular. So chat functionality between users, being able to have activity feeds, notifications, comment threads, sharing pictures with each other, normal social network type of stuff. Dashboards are very popular with business-related applications so that they can gather insights about their data, they can aggregate on things, they can visualize it in charts, and be able to search and keep track of it, just have an overview picture of their business. CRMs and ERPs, other very common types of needs, functionality that businesses need in order to run properly. So being able to manage all of their customers or have some kind of an internal custom flow that takes in all of the aspects of their business in a really streamlined and automated way. Scheduling, very popular type of functionality that can be done a number of ways. There's also a lot of plugins that can help with certain aspects of calendars and managing dates, but you can do all sorts of things when it comes to creating scheduling functionality for appointments, for booking reservations, blocking out dates, creating availability, custom time slots, all that sort of thing to do scheduling type of features. Tracking is a common type of functionality that you'll find in a lot of different types of apps. So project management or internal operations to keep track of different statuses, or even with personal use cases if somebody wants to track their fitness activity or the meals that they eat every day. E-commerce, big topic, lots you can do there. So you can absolutely do shopping carts and checkout flows. Integrating with payment gateways happens through APIs, and sometimes there are plugins available for it as well, so that you can take payments. And that can be any kind of payment. It can be one-time payments, subscription payments, split payments. It can go to multiple people. Just depends on the type of payment gateway that you're integrating with. So PayPal, Stripe, there's a lot of other ones out there. Lots you can do with e-commerce. Dynamic forms, kind of the heart of most applications, is being able to collect information from your users. And the way that the forms are presented is completely up to you, how you're designing it, the logic behind it. If it can be a questionnaire, a survey, or it can just be a more simple form. It can be multi-step. Lots of different ways to approach forms. And of course, calculators. We've actually seen a lot of financial-based applications come through and build out custom calculators where they would have otherwise been using spreadsheets, but gets very cumbersome in a spreadsheet. So a custom application can really make things work more efficiently, or just be more convenient for anyone that needs to work with those functions. Now, a few different examples of applications that can absolutely be built on Bubble, but there are some considerations here, include the following. So media-rich portfolios, marketing pages, blogs, static websites. The common thread with all of these is that they're not really interactive. They don't really need users to log in necessarily to consume this content. So while you can absolutely build that type of website really on Bubble, there are plenty of other services that do a great job for those types of apps specifically. And the Bubble platform is really meant to be more of a data-driven, user interactive type of system. So you might find that you're going to be reinventing the wheel quite a bit with some of those static type of applications. With Bubble apps, we're looking at building custom experiences, things that are unique to your market, your industry, your actual needs. There's so many other platforms out there that make it easier for you to build static websites really quickly. Like I said, you can do it on Bubble, but it might not be so necessary to do it on this particular platform. Then there are certainly types of applications that don't really work very well on Bubble. So anything with heavy graphics and animation. So if we're talking about games, those are things that you'll need to build coded or in a different platform that's more meant for that. Multimedia editing, like video editing, podcast audio editing, Photoshop type of applications are not best for this type of platform. If you're going to try to build something like that, you're likely going to be integrating with a lot of custom code anyway. So probably better to use different systems. HIPAA compliance is on here more as a way for you to check with your industry if you have any specific regulatory compliance that you need to meet. Bubble is not HIPAA compliant, for example, so you wouldn't want to be building applications that have to store sensitive patient information. So that's something that you definitely want to be aware of. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of bells and whistles that Bubble offers you in terms of managing your application and extending its functionality further for the long term. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. We are not going to go through every single bell and whistle that it offers you. There's just too many of them. Instead, we're going to stay focused on the core fundamentals, the core concepts that you need to build an application, that anyone needs to build any type of application on Bubble. These are things that if you have a good understanding of them, you will be able to evolve your application in a smarter way, and you'll have full control over how it works. And that's what we want to stay focused on today. Before we dive into those core concepts, I want to run through some frequently asked questions that we see come up all the time in case you're still on the fence about whether this platform is right for you and your app. The first one is, can I design a professional looking app? Yes, a big yes. You have complete control over the user interface, the UI, and how it is presented to your users. You're actually given a blank canvas. So it's up to you to leverage all of the tools and the design settings to have it look the way that you want in terms of the layouts and the aesthetic, the colors, the styles. Everything is under your control. And if you don't believe me, we're going to go through some demos during this video and you'll see how customizable. Every aspect of the front end appearance is available to you. Next question is, are there templates? Yes, there are. Bubble does have a template marketplace where you can build off of a template and modify a template, especially if there's something that is close to what you're looking for. But we do recommend building your custom applications from scratch. It's so much better for your learning to configure everything completely around your own needs. Templates are great to learn from, to see how things can get set up. And if you're not building something super complicated or super custom, then a template can help speed up your development and you can get something out the door rather quickly. But it is likely if you're building something highly customized for your own needs, you're going to end up changing a lot about the template anyway. So rather than giving yourself more work than is necessary, build from a blank page. I promise you'll learn a lot more from it. Are there plugins? Yes, there is a very big plugin marketplace. Some plugins are published by Bubble themselves, but the majority of the plugins are actually created by the community. There's going to be free plugins and paid plugins. And so you can explore. A lot of them have example pages, demos to show you how to use them. And it's really going to be a case by case in terms of what makes sense or when it makes sense to use a plugin. Can I put my app in the Apple App and Google Play stores? Yes, you can. You can do that through a process known as wrapping. So this is not converting your app to native code. It's just converting the web app into a format that is compatible for those app stores. There are third-party services that you would go through to make this happen. And just keep in mind that at best, your app is going to be a hybrid at that point. While you will be able to download your application from the app stores, you still need to have an internet connection. You're not going to get full native mobile app capabilities, and you'll want to check with the wrapping service that you use to understand what the limitations might be there. Can I import my designs, so mock-ups of designs, not functions, from other tools like Figma, Adobe XD, InVision? Bubble only has an import tool for Figma right now. There are several limitations around how everything gets imported and what gets converted properly to Bubble. It's not 100% perfect. If you have simple Figma designs, it could work really great for you and save you a lot of time. But in most cases, you're just going to want to do your designs from scratch directly in Bubble. That's what we have seen works the best. Can I export or host my app's code? No, you cannot. Bubble apps only work on Bubble. So you cannot import code from external services and expect them to work on Bubble. You cannot export your code from Bubble and expect them to work on different app platforms. So it's all contained. And this is a great thing. And this is part of why Bubble is able to make it so easy for non-technical entrepreneurs and app builders to create their apps on Bubble, because everything's handled for you. They take care of the servers, they take care of the data security, they take care of the connections to your domains, all of that stuff. You do not need to worry about it. And for that to happen, it needs to be in a closed environment. So you're not able to export or host your own app's code. With that said, you can export your data. So this is our next question here. Can I export my data? Yes, absolutely. It is your data. Bubble does not own your data. So you can expect to export it a few ways via API or CSV. Bubble has some very helpful, easy to use tools for exporting to a spreadsheet. So that is always available to you. Is my data secure? Yes, it is. Bubble is built on AWS. This is Amazon Web Servers, and it encrypts your data at rest, which is just a fancy way of saying that there is encryption happening so that if you're not authorized to access the data, you will not be able to get to it. And Amazon's web servers power a lot of the biggest websites in the world, and Bubble's security detail page on their website actually goes into this in much more depth. I do encourage you to take a look at that if you're looking for very specific security requirements for your application. Can I collaborate with other designers or builders? Yes, you can. You can invite other Bubble users with their own Bubble accounts to access your editor so that they can either view things and not edit anything, or they can edit. You can give them more access to work with you. Bubble also has capability to have multiple versions. So you can be working in one version of your app, your collaborator can be working in another. There are systems to sync all of those changes, lots of different things you can do for that. Depending on what plan you're on, that's also going to dictate how many collaborators you have. Can I really scale? Yeah, well, this is the big question, right? Yes, you absolutely can. In fact, we specifically work with entrepreneurs who are building apps for business. So they are looking to scale and stay on this platform for the long term. you are literally given a blank canvas. It is up to you to put together all of the components in the right way, in an efficient way, in an optimized way, so that it is reliable, it's consistent, and it can evolve long-term once you have more users on board, you have higher volume of activity. And like I said, there's a lot of strategy around doing that right. All right, so here's what's coming up next. We are going to talk about the pillars of every single Bubble application. The database, right? That is very much going to power your app and how it functions. Most of these applications that are built on Bubble, they are data driven, whether it's data that you are providing as the platform owner or your users are generating themselves. Responsive design. These apps got to look good, right? So, and they have to look good on all different kinds of device sizes. So we'll touch on what capabilities you have around not just designing an application and putting something together that looks good, but also making sure that it's consistent, right? That it's intuitive, that your users are always oriented when they're in your application. Workflows, this is where the magic happens. This is where things come to life. And Bubble really works in a if this, then that type of logic. If you click a button, then we send an email. That is such a basic example, but that's essentially what it is. That's the kind of logic that you're going to be putting together. If someone takes some action, then what do? Do we update the database? Do we show the user something? Do we have something appear on the screen? And visual programming, we're going to just talk about how Bubble thinks and how you need to approach putting together a Bubble app. The mindset that you want to take. Like I said, you know, you're programming, you are a developer here. There aren't any lines of code that you need to write, but there's very much a logic-based approach that you need to take in order to put everything together. You have to tell Bubble every single thing you want it to do. It has no idea what you're trying to build. You are given a blank canvas. So if you instruct Bubble with every step and every action, then you will be able to produce that outcome for your users as well. So there's a lot to know about how to do that properly and a lot to know about where to find the tools you need to execute on those things. Then at the very end of this video, we're going to go through some overviews of just other features to be aware of. Tools and resources available to you for testing and deploying. We're also going to go over a list of advanced capabilities so that you're aware what is possible when you're ready to grow beyond your first version of your application and expand its capability. All right, building an application is very visual. So as I go through and teach you all of the core concepts and fundamentals you need to know, I'm going to be putting this all into context through several feature walkthroughs of common functionality so that you can see where all of these things live in the Bubble platform and how it can all come to life. In fact, let's go ahead and take a quick sneak peek at the demos that we're going to be building so that you can get a sense for the level of design and functionality that's coming up that we'll be going through. So the first one is a very common piece of functionality, which is a sign up. Now, in some cases, your sign up might be very simple, one single form like this. In other cases, it might be more of a multi-step onboarding sequence. All of that is very possible, but we'll build this from scratch so that you can see how to put this together. This layout is very common for modern web applications. We're also going to look at an expense and budget tracker. So we've got more calculations involved here. We're working with a lot of dynamic data. And so here we have, you know, the user can add in all of their expenses. They can fill out this little form. This form collapses down. We can switch over to the budget manager. So the user can type in what their budget is and the app will tell them, you know, hey, you're under budget, you're over budget, you're getting close to your budget, right? It's very interactive. So if I change my budget of my supplies to a higher budget, right? So now I'm not as close to it and this changes for me in real time. This is all custom logic that is built for this particular feature. These are not templates, right? There's not a built-in budget calculator that Bubble has. We're leveraging different components and putting them together with specific logic to make it function in this way. So that's what we're going to be looking at as well. Then we're going to look at chat functionality. This is very popular with any type of app that has users communicating with each other. So think of a project management type of tool where you have team members messaging each other or a social network. This has actually been designed from the perspective of a support agent communicating with customers. So they have statuses that they can track. And really when we go to this feature, we're going to be looking more at the layout and the design, how these chat bubbles have been made more dynamic to expand and contract in their width. How we can switch over to different conversations between the different customers. We have file attachments for each of these individual messages. These are different features that, again, you can customize for your needs. You don't have to have all of these different things, and you can, of course, make this even fancier. The last feature that we'll go through is a shopping cart and checkout flow. So I'll step through this real quick here so that you can see what the experience is like. I'm going to start a new order. I can see different items I can choose. This is a menu of pizzas. So I'll add one there. Maybe I'll add a second one. I want a quantity of 2, and it's adding up my order summary here. I'll add another pizza, right? So I can remove those items. It's going to recalculate my total every single time I add new items. And once I'm ready to check out, it's going to take me to a payment collection form that is connected to Stripe, which would be the payment gateway that I would use here. Now, before we move on to our next section, I want to orient you real quick here inside of our demo application so you know where all of the sections are as we go through the next topic. So every single bubble editor is broken up into 7 sections, and you can navigate between those sections by clicking on any one of these tabs here. Right now we're on the design tab. This is our canvas. This is how we design all of our front end pages. So you can see I'm given a blank page to start. I have a number of different elements that I can choose from. So let's say I click on a button, add it to the page, and now I'm off to the races. Now I can configure this button however I want. I can have it look different. It doesn't have to be this color or this size or this font. I can also change the positioning depending on other elements on this page. But this property editor here lets me configure that element further. I'm going to jump over to another page so you can see what it would look like with something already designed. Let's actually go to our sign up demo here. So a few more elements that we'll see. Here's my group. I have a number of different text elements. They're spaced in a certain way. This page is responsive. In fact, this design area lets me toggle between 2 different views. I can look at the UI builder, which is where you'll spend most of your time, but also the responsive mode of this screen. And Bubble gives me different preset breakpoints so that I can make sure that it's still responsive to different sizes. Your workflow tab is where you make things happen. I'm going to switch over to a page that has some actions. Let's go to that messaging demonstration here. All right, so this is where we had the conversation threads on the left and the messages would show up on the right. So this is where you can visually program your logic and tell Bubble to do certain things. For example, if the user is going to create a new message, they'll hit a send button, and we're telling Bubble in what order to execute certain actions. Notice that there is no code happening here. I have simply chosen specific actions from Bubble's big list of available actions, right? It's all categorized. We can do a lot of different things here. And to execute these in a certain sequence. Our data tab is where we configure the architecture of the database. So every single Bubble app is going to come in with a built-in user data type, which equates to a user table, right? So if I go over to this sub-tab for app data, and click on all users, I can see that I have 6 users in my database under the user data type. You can think of it as a table. So every Bubble app comes with that so that users can sign up with a secure password and all of that, but it's up to you to create additional data types that make sense for your application. So you can see that I've added a few different data types for the demo features that we'll be going through. And if we go over to the app data sub-tab, I can click through and see some of the entries that have been added for these sample tables. Okay, there's a couple of other sub-tabs here to help you manage other things around data, like your privacy rules, files that are uploaded, option sets. We'll talk about those in a sec. Styles is our next tab, and this is where you can configure consistent appearance properties across your entire application. I highly recommend you take advantage of these because not only do they keep you consistent, but they also help you design faster so that you don't have to go through every single button and set it up over and over and over again in the same way, changing the color, changing the font size, changing the font style or the spacing or the roundness. There's a lot of different appearance properties for all of these different types of elements. It's not just buttons. We're talking about everything, your text, your containers, your links, your maps. Absolutely everything has at least a handful of appearance properties. And so when you set up styles, you're basically creating presets. The next tab we have here is plugins. So Bubble has a very big plugin marketplace. Some plugins are published by Bubble themselves. You can see these first ones here, but most of them are actually published by the entire Bubble community. Some of them are paid, some of them are free.
We can search, do an example here for email related plugins. So lots of different options to extend functionality in your apps. So very helpful area if you're looking to do something that you can't exactly build yourself directly in Bubble. Then we have a general settings area with a lot of sub-tabs for all sorts of settings within your application. I do encourage you to kind of step through each one of these so you can see what is customizable there. But a lot of this is just kind of back-end, connecting to your domain, your app plan and billing, all of that. The log section is where you can monitor the performance of your application. There are some other areas here that have to do with some back-end workflows. That's more of an advanced capability, but you have some things to help you monitor that activity. And this is generally how you can see what kind of capacity your app needs in order to support all of the activity that your app has from your users or from maybe heavy workflows that are happening in your app, so you know if you need to upgrade or not. There's also different metrics around the usage of your application as well. Now, throughout the rest of this video, we're actually going to be more focused on these first 3 tabs. And I'm actually going to switch back over here to talk through those a little bit more. Now, those first 3 tabs make up the 3 primary pillars of every single Bubble app: database, front-end design, and your workflows. So as you can see, database is where you store your information. This is data that either you can pre-populate as the app owner and or data that your users are generating. So if they're uploading files, they're filling out forms, all of that can be manipulated once it's in the database in a structure that you have defined and you've organized yourself. The front end design, so that's where the canvas was, where you add your visual elements to the page and you can position things how you want. You get it to look however you'd like. And not only that, but it's responsive. So it can actually adapt to different screen sizes, all the way from a desktop computer down to a smartphone. And then the workflows are like the brains of your application. This is where you instruct Bubble to do certain things in your app whenever a user interacts with the front end design. So they click on a button and then that triggers some sequence of actions to occur. So these 3 things combined create a full stack platform that addresses every aspect of a functioning application. And you do not need to go to an external service to manage data, to do the front end designs, to do the logic. It's all housed in one place for you. It's really great because they all communicate to each other, and it's all under your control, which is the best thing here. Okay, so now we're going to take a closer look at the database and the different components that you are responsible for putting together for your own app. There's 3 different sections here: data types, fields, and option sets. Data types are essentially your tables. Every single Bubble application comes with one built-in data type called the user type. Bubble essentially assumes that most applications are going to require users to sign up with an email and a password, and they can engage with the application as that person, with whatever rules you create around what they have access to do, to see. Beyond that, it is up to you to create whatever other data types you need for your application. So Bubble doesn't know what you're building, right? You can't just say, hey, Bubble, I'm building a marketplace, and then boom, you have data types to support a marketplace. It just doesn't work that way. You have to create every individual type that you want for your application. This is a good thing because you have complete control over how your data is organized. The next piece here are the fields. Fields are created per type. And you can have 1 or more fields within each type. And this is just a way for you to save certain information with a specific format to the record in the database. So for example, user data type, a user might have a first name, a last name, a profile picture, a date of birth, right? These are different fields you would create within that data type. And then you go to the next data type and you create the fields that are specific to that type. And not only that, but you also tell Bubble the format of the fields. Is this a text? Is this a number? Is it a date? Is it a file? Is it a geographic location? There's actually a lot more you can do with fields and their definition, but essentially that is how you tell Bubble what to expect when content is being saved to a particular record. And then option sets, this third point here, this is how you can manage lists of predetermined choices. So an example would be marital status. Let's say that you wanted to collect that information from your users. You want to know what their marital status is. So you would create one option set, let's say it's called marital status, and then the list of choices within that set: married, single, widow, divorce. How you display that set back to your users, completely up to you. Lots of ways you can do that in the front end design. They can check boxes, they can choose from a drop down or a radio button, they can search through the choices if you happen to have a bigger list. Another example of a common option set is statuses. So if you have users creating posts or listings of some sort where they need to go through multiple status steps, your option set could be called, let's say listing status. And the choices would be things like draft, archived, published, pending review, right? Things like that. You are in complete control over what the sets are called, what the choices are. It's just whatever you need in your application as far as predetermined list of choices. The next thing I want to do here is put this into perspective with a different visual representation that you might actually feel more comfortable with, more familiar with, which is a traditional spreadsheet. We've actually heard from a lot of people who are just getting started with Bubble that the database is often the hardest part. It can feel really abstract, especially if you don't have any database background or web application experience. And not understanding kind of what it means to set up a data type or create relationships between things. So what I want to do is show you the equivalent of what you're doing in your editor within a traditional spreadsheet format. At the end of the day, all you're really doing is setting up tables, but it is up to you to configure every part of that table, the labels for them, how many columns essentially you're creating, and also telling Bubble what kind of values are being stored, the format of the values. So in my example here, let's imagine for a second that I'm building an e-commerce application where customers will select products that they want to add to their shopping cart and then indicate a quantity for each of those products. We calculate a total and we can make a payment on that final amount. All of this information to support a full checkout flow is going to be supported by multiple tables because we want to see this data and organize it in different ways depending on whether we're at the customer level, at the parent order level, or at the individual line item level, right? The product, the quantity, and the subtotal of that item. So if we look at my spreadsheet workbook here, I have things broken down into 4 tabs. These represent 4 different tables or 4 different data types. Okay, so the first one here is my user table or my user data type. This is equivalent to this data type here, right? So I'm in my data tab under my data type definition. These would be all of my tables in my application. Now, once I go into one data type, I can set up what would essentially be the columns for that table. So a user has a date of birth, a name, a photo. Okay, so I have this over here. I don't have the exact same fields, but the fields that you create in your editor, I have as column headers in my spreadsheet. So a user would have a first name, a last name, a type, an email address, right? Users have a creation date and a last modified date. If I go into my next table, so my products here, a product would have a name and a price. Okay, if I go back into my editor, go over to my product data type, I have name and price. This is a better example because they are actually the same between the two. And notice that when I set up the product data type, a product's name is a text, product's price is a number. So I set that up every time I create a new field, right? I had done price like this, and I selected the field type saying, hey, this needs to be a number. We are going to want to do math with this number at some point. So Bubble needs to know that this value is something we can calculate on. Now, we get a little bit fancier when it comes time to relating records to one another or relating a record to an option set. Let's start with the option set. So here under my data kind of management area, I have a sub-tab called option sets, and here's where I can manage all of those different lists of choices. So for example, I have an option set here called user type. So I just created that by typing the name here, hitting create, and I've got my new user type set. I can change the name here if I want. And then I defined the list of options within this set. So users can be admins, a customer, or a guest. I can add another choice and it would add it right there to it. So if we go back to my example user table here, we can see text field, and then I have this in orange here to indicate that this is an option set. So this isn't something that the user is typing in, it's something that they're choosing. They're selecting from some design that I have on a form, on a front end page for them. Maybe it's a drop down, maybe it's a radio button. The fields that I have here in this dark gray or this black color, these are actually built-in fields. So Bubble has a number of built-in fields for every single data type, creation date. This is a date and time stamp of when the record was first generated. This is not something you can change. And then the last modify date. So if we updated the customer's last name, for example, this would update to whatever that timestamp was. Unique IDs. Every single bubble record is going to get a unique ID. You cannot change those. This is very helpful for having completely unique across all tables, some identifier. Now, it's not sequential like this. I did this in this format just for simplicity, but unique IDs are actually more random and they're a longer string. I'm going to open up a record here so you can see this is really what the unique IDs look like. So this is essentially what you're doing. When you set up your data types, you're creating tables. And when you set up the fields, you're essentially creating the column headers. And then you do have to define what type of format those fields are going to be, so Bubble understands how to work with them going forward. Now, when it comes time to relating records to one another, I'm actually going to walk you through that when we go through our shopping cart example, because it'll involve workflows. It'll be easier to see all of that coming together. Now let's jump into responsive design and in general, your front end UI. This is how your user is going to experience the visuals of your application. You are in complete control over the layouts of your pages, how things are positioned, the spacing between things, the alignment of all of your visual elements, how things look stylistically, right? You can add your own branding, your own colors, your fonts. There's a lot that goes into designing the front end pages of your application. Now, it's important to understand that Bubble actually has two modes that you can design your pages in. First is a completely fixed setting. The second is a responsive setting. Responsive means that the pages can adapt to different screen sizes. So if you're building for a desktop and somebody views it on a tablet, the page can resize itself and elements can be shifted around so that it still looks good on those other device sizes. Whatever direction you're going in, from a larger screen all the way down to a mobile device, you have complete control over that behavior. And that is, I cannot stress enough, going to work best for you if you design with the responsive engine enabled from the start. Okay, so I mentioned that there is a fixed mode that you can create your application in, but there are actually fewer cases where you would want to do that. These days, most web applications are responsive. People expect for them to be responsive, even if you're only designing your application for one target device. So if it's just going to be a mobile app or just for a larger computer, you still want to design with the responsive engine enabled. Why? Because Bubble is going to be in charge of keeping everything neatly aligned, spaced really neatly. You have a lot of really cool tools to keep things consistent. You're essentially designing on a grid. Take advantage of the responsive engine, enable it from the beginning, learn the settings. We're going to go through a bunch of them here today so you can see what to look out for. All right, so what I want to do here is go through an introduction of the layout settings available to you when you start adding elements to your page and how you can manipulate all of the layouts. So I'm on a blank page right now. I'm on my index page, and if I double click anywhere here, I pull up the property editor, okay? This is a way for me to manage various appearance settings, layout settings, conditions, and this is a context-sensitive window, which means that the settings available to me will change based on whatever element I'm working with. I have double-clicked on the index page, and so I can only manage the index page from here. If I add a button to the page, then you'll see that the property editor changes its perspective to be able to work with the button. So for example, I can change the label that's on the button. Let's say submit. I can change the style of the button. We have some preset styles here. Or if I wanted to remove the style, I can do that. And I have more controls to independently style this button as opposed to having a preset applied to it. So maybe I give it a green color here. Ooh, that's so bright. Let's make it a darker green. There we go. And a number of different settings based on what's available for that element. Notice how when I move this button around, that it is staying exactly where I want it. Bubble is not shifting it anywhere for me. It's not repositioning it. That is because the page itself, the index page here, is set to a fixed container layout style. I can change this to one of my three responsive styles to have Bubble's responsive engine kick in and position things for me on a grid. So if I change this to a row, you see that the button snapped to the upper left corner. If I try to now move this button just kind of over here and I let go of my mouse, it's going to snap it right back. I can no longer freely position things on the page, but this is a good thing, because this is going to keep you consistent. And if you are consistently designing on a grid, you're going to create beautiful applications that are intuitive for your users. Nothing's going to get lost. It's going to force you to be a lot cleaner in your designs. Not to mention, it's going to be able to adapt to different screen sizes in a better way. So I'm going to add a couple more buttons so that we can see how we can see rows and columns come together. So I'm going to copy this button and paste it. I'm just using my keyboard shortcuts here. I'm going to paste a few more other ones. I'm just using Control-C, Control-V. I'm on a PC. If you're on a Mac, you can do Apple-C, Apple-V. There's a lot of different shortcuts, actually. If you right-click anywhere on the page, you have some settings there. You also have an edit menu. Depending on what you're working with, you'll have different options available to you. So before I change some of these layout settings, let me change the appearance of these buttons a little bit so we can keep them apart. I'll change this one to a primary. Maybe I'll do like a darker purple color here for this button, and maybe a different yellow for this one. Right, that way we can see different buttons there. So notice how when I copied and pasted those buttons, they all fall in a row. They're just stacked from left to right, one after another. Again, that is because the container they are inside of, which is the page, and we can have other containers, but the container they're inside of is set to a row style. Now I have settings to manage this row, right? Right now they're aligned to the left, so they start from the left and stack going to the right. I can go in the other direction. If I go to the center alignment, then we have, they're all going to just naturally start from the center and then work their way out depending on the number of elements you've added. Then we have some distribution settings. So I can space them out where there is space between them, and you can see there's even distribution. So the outer buttons of my row are going to go to the very edges of their container. Again, in this case, the container is the page. If I choose this other option here, it's going to have some space outside of those edges, right? We have a little space on the left, a little space on the right, but still even distribution between them. On top of that, and I'm going to show you here with the center alignment, I can add my own gap spacing between the elements. So notice that they're touching, right? The edges are right next to each other. There's no space there. I can select this and create some column gap spacing. Let's say 10 pixels of spacing gives me, right, a little bit of a gap there. If I increase it to 20, a little bit more. So I have complete control over how much space happens between each of these visual elements. So now if I go to, let me just remove this here, undo this setting, changing the layout style of the page to a column, you see how Bubble redirects them and now stacks them vertically on top of each other, creating a column out of these elements. So I also have container alignment settings here. Right now they're stocked at the top, they're stacked at the top aligned. If I go to the center, that's at the middle of the page, we can see about the height of the page right there. Let me actually take down the height of my page to 600 pixels, just to keep it a little bit shorter, that way we can see it better. Bottom aligned, I can space them out vertically with space around, right? We have a little space at the end there, and then at the beginning versus space between, so it moves those outer buttons to the very edges, right? So I have control over those positionings in a column and row grid format. Now, align to parent. This is a different one that you're going to have specific use cases for this. Typically, if you have a lot of elements within a container, you're going to go with row or column. But if you have a single element with the container, that's a great use case for align to parent. That's certainly not the only use case. There are others. It just depends on what you're designing. But I'm going to show you what the behavior is here. Let me remove all of these buttons except for one and change the page to align to parent. Now, if I go to the element inside of that align to parent container, I can place this element in one of these nonents. This is broken up into 9 sections. So we have one of 9 nonents that we can select. Right now it's in the upper left corner. If I go to the middle left, lower left, right? I can just go all the way around like this. I can even put it in the center. All right, so now we're on the third pillar of every Bubble application, which are the workflows. And I described this earlier as the brains of your app, right? This is where you instruct Bubble to carry out actions for you. Bubble, again, has no idea what you're doing, so you're going to have to create the logic for every single interaction that you want to happen in the application, whether it's something that's an automatic thing or if the user has to click on a button or load a page or provide some information by selecting or typing something in. That is up to you to define so that Bubble knows what to do with it. You want to think of workflows really as the connecting piece between your database and the user's front end experience, okay? So with workflows, Bubble follows an if this, then that kind of logic. If something happens, then something else will happen. So if a user clicks a button, then one or more actions will run. If the user loads the page, then one or more actions will run. If a change has occurred in the database, then something can run kind of automatically. You don't always need to have user interaction to make things happen. That's where you can get really fancy, really comprehensive and custom, automation systems. Not only that, but you can create a lot of really sophisticated conditional logic on your actions. So if somebody logs in and they fill out the form, email, password, click on the button that says log in, the next step for them naturally would be to take them inside of the application, right? Maybe redirect them to their dashboard. But what if you have an email confirmation process? So if they've logged in and they have not confirmed their email, you want to take them a different way. You want to show an alert message or take them to a different page or show a pop-up of some sort saying, hey, we need you to confirm your email. Go check your inbox first, or maybe click on this button to resend that email. Versus if they log in and they are confirmed, then they can go into their dashboard. So that conditional split is logic that you can build into your workflows as well. So different things can happen based on who the person is or what data they're interacting with, what time of day it is. I mean, honestly, there's so many different variables that you have available to you to create the exact experience that you need for your users to accomplish what they came to your app for. Bubble has a ginormous list of built-in actions that are all categorized for you so that you know exactly where to go. Now you can extend functionality, workflows and actions with plugins that you install into your application. Like I mentioned a little earlier, the marketplace is really big and most of the plugins are published by the community. There are, of course, plugins published by Bubble themselves, but you're going to find all sorts of plugins, some that will allow you to trigger different kinds of actions or add different types of visual elements to your list of elements, right, in the front end design that you can drag and drop onto the canvas. But you'll have to just see what is going to actually make sense for your app. All right, so now we're going to dive into our first demonstration, which is a very common piece of functionality, the sign up form. Most applications are going to have some method of signing up their users. So we're going to go through a lot of the common steps that you would take. And we're going to look at the three pillars coming together in a start to finish experience. We'll look at the data structure necessary for the user account, the front end design that the new user would be experiencing when they're filling in their details and they're clicking on a button, and the workflow logic to connect the two together and actually create that new user record in the database. Okay, so this is the sign up form that I'm going to be rebuilding from scratch, from a blank page, so that you can see how it all comes together. This is a design I had done ahead of time so you can understand what the goal, what the end result is going to be. But basically what we've got here is a sign up form with a couple inputs, a button for the user to click and actually trigger a workflow, sign up the user, and an image over here on the right. And I've actually got some conditional logic to hide this image once the user is on a smaller device size so that it's not really in the way. One thing I want you to be mindful of, just take a look here at the layout of this page so that we can start to make decisions about how we're going to set up our container styles. At the page level, I'm really looking at one giant row, right? If we look at the entire left side, this whole white section, that is one block in our row of two blocks, the white and the blue, the light blue, okay? Now inside of this white block, I have another container. You can actually see the border, right? Which is much smaller. It kind of centers the group a little bit, centers the form. And this container is actually set up in a column structure. You see how all of the elements inside of that container stack vertically. We have the welcome, sign up, email, input, password, all of it's vertical. We have two other row configurations inside of our overall column, right, within this line here. Okay, if these were within the parent column, the forgot password text would fall below this checkbox, but they're actually next to each other on the same line. So there's another container in there to kind of isolate those two elements and put them in their own row so that they can be side by side on the same line. Same thing is happening here for the already have an account text and the login. So just be mindful of that layout. These are the kinds of things that you want to think about when you are putting together your initial layouts, is kind of get a rough picture of the rows and columns that you're forming through your visual elements, because you're really going to start from the container level and then work your way in. And that's going to keep your development more efficient. Okay, so let's head over to the editor. Let's create a new page, and I'm going to call this sign up demo 2. My first one is currently being taken up by the existing demonstration. So we're going to start from a blank page here. I'm going to hit create. And I have my new page. So I first want to do a couple of settings at the page level. So if I open up the property editor for this page, head over to the layout tab, I'm going to move away from that default fixed setting, and I'm going to set the page to a row layout style. So now anything I add, remember, anything I add to my page is going to fall in a row. They're going to stack horizontally. So my first elements within my row are going to be two big containers, that white group and on the left, and then the light blue group on the right. So I'm just going to draw an initial setting here. We're going to change the widths and all of that in a moment. And let's do another group. I'm just going to copy and paste. So you can see these are side by side like that, group A and B. Okay, open up my elements tree. Now I'm going to give them some names so they're easier for us to identify. We're going to say group left, like that, and over here, group right. And I'll change the colors, the background colors of these groups so that we have some of that styling happening. So I'll remove the default style, which is just a transparent group. There's no background color to it. And I'll give it a flat color of white. And then this one, I'm going to remove the style as well, give it a flat color of that light blue. Maybe I'll start here, maybe take this down just a little bit. It's not going to be a perfect match, but we'll get kind of close. There we go. Okay, so there's my left group, and then there's my right group. Now, let's talk about the widths of these containers. If I go into the layout setting of this group, I don't really have a lot of control over dynamic widths. I can set up a fixed width or a fixed height. And the reason I can only do fixed is because the group itself is set to a fixed container layout. I want to change this layout to one of my responsive settings. Now, this container is going to be an align to parent, because the element inside of this container is going to be my form with that border around it. Okay, let's go ahead and add that so we can start to see that coming together, and then I'll go back to the widths, right? So I'm just going to drag this form like this here, and we're going to call this group form. Okay, and group form is going to sit in the center of group left. Group form is in the center of group left. Let's go to the elements tree. So you can see here, group form is inside of group left and it's in the center. With group form, I'm going to give it some borders. Okay, so I'm just removing the style and all of this so you can see where the settings really happen with the appearance properties. So let's do a solid border, give it some roundness on the corners of 10 pixels, and it's a thickness of 1 pixel on the border. I can of course increase it. I don't want it to be that obvious, just a subtle border. And I'll take down the color of the border a bit so it's more lighter, it's lighter in color. That was a weird way to say that. Let me remove real quick here under grid and borders. The bubble has a way for you to kind of always see the boundaries of all of your elements when you have this turned on, which is helpful. I tend to have this on, but I'm going to turn this off for a moment so that you can see what the actual visual properties are when the user's looking at it. Okay, so here we have our left group in white, right group in the light blue, and then a center group, which I've called group form, with the border around it. You know what I want to do is I think I want to change the size of my page. I'm going to go over to the layout and change the preset page width to full width, get a little bit more width there. And this full width is great for desktop size applications. again, understanding that we are building this with the responsive engine enabled, so even if I'm on a smaller screen, things are going to compress down. But this feels a little bit more comfortable for me since I am working on a larger screen anyway. So notice that there's now some space over here on the right. We're not filling the whole frame, whereas in our example, everything is fully filling the frame. So we're going to get to that in a moment here. Okay, so back to my group left, okay, which contains my group form. This group left currently has a fixed width setting. Now I have some controls now. I have more controls over changing the widths and the heights because I changed it to a responsive setting. Remember before when it was fixed, I only had fixed settings. Now that it is an aligned to parent, I can change this a little bit more. I'm going to remove the fixed width setting. I don't want it fixed to 479. I want it to adapt to different screen sizes. So I'll uncheck this, and it's going to maintain that what was previously the fixed width. Now it's going to move it over to the minimum width, which means that Bubble's going to make it at least that wide. And if I'm on a smaller screen, it's still going to be at least that wide, so things could get cut off. So I'm going to remove the minimum width. Okay, so now it is fully dynamic. As long as there is space for this white group to exist, it's going to expand as much as possible. And even if I take down the page size super narrow, it's going to continue to compress down. Okay, but I don't necessarily want it to be just fully extendable like this because I also have this blue group on the right. Now let's update this one here real quick as well. I'm going to change this to align to parent so that the image inside, we don't have that quite yet, but the image will sit inside in the center. And I'm also going to remove the fixed width setting and remove the minimum width. Okay, so now that they're both dynamic, they're taking up equal parts within the page, right? They're both elements in the row at the page level. I want to give the form a little bit more room. I want to prioritize the form and make the size of this space here for the image be less. I don't need as much space for this here. So this group on the left, I'm going to have it max out. Okay, percentage-wise, you can do things either by pixel or by percentage. Max out at 60% of its most immediate parent. In this case, it's the page. And this group here is going to max out at 40% of its parent. So you see now this is taking up 60% of the space. This one's taking up 40%. You don't have to go off of percentages. You can go off of pixels. You also don't even have to be specific in this way, but I wanted this type of look where the form is always going to be more dominant in the space it takes up on the page. And so I'm only allowing this blue group to go 40% of the parent, which is the page, okay? And if I go into my responsive viewer here and just kind of preview, you see how that the ratio of the 60 to 40 percentages, it stays put, right? As I expand or contract the page, they're always going to be 60 to 40% relative to whatever the page's overall width is, okay? All right, so now let's look at this group here. This is our form. We're going to need more space than this. This form is still set to a fixed setting, so the elements inside of the form right now are fixed. I want to change this to a column. So we've actually mixed and matched 3 different layout styles. The page is a row, this left group is an align to parent, and the form group is a column. Now the column is what's going to have all the content inside with my text and my inputs. Okay, so let's give this width a little bit more room. Let's remove the fixed width setting, and maybe I just want to max this out at, let's say 400 pixels, something like that. We might end up adjusting this, and let me turn on my element borders here, but this is going to be a good place for us to start. Notice how I have not touched inputs or buttons. I am starting with the containers. It might feel boring, I might feel a little tedious, but I promise you it's going to save you so much time if you take care of the foundation of your designs, right? You're basically putting together building blocks so that once it comes time to adding the buttons and the inputs, they are exactly where you want them to be on the page, right? Layout-wise, position-wise. So, okay, so let's start adding some elements now that we have a form that is giving us enough space here. I've maxed it to 400 pixels. And I'm going to start with a text like this. and we're going to say welcome. Okay, and this is going to be, I'm going to change the styling a little bit. I'm going to up the font size. Let's make this a heavier font weight, maybe the medium, maybe one more than that, semi-bold. Okay, now you might be tempted to do things like center the text here inside of this, these boundaries of the text element, or maybe increase the size so that it fills the element boundaries. What I want you to prioritize is under the layouts here, the width and height settings, the responsive width and height settings. So I'm going to take away the fixed width setting. I'm going to take away the minimum width. Okay, you see how when I took away the fixed, now because there's no max, it expands to the full width of its parent. Because there's no max, we're telling Bubble, hey, have it grow as far as you can within its parent. And that's what's happening there. If I said I want the max to be 300 pixels, then it stops at 300 pixels, right? What I'm going to do instead, though, is remove the minimum, like this, and have it fit to the content. So welcome is a certain number of characters, and it only needs that much width. If my content was bigger, right, so if I said welcome to the app, like this, the boundaries of that text element are going to grow with it, grow with the content. So you're going to have more control over your elements' position and spacing relative to other elements if you generally have things, as far as text goes especially, generally have things fitting to content. Now, not everything needs to fit to content. Sometimes you're going to want to fix things or have certain minimums or maximums. But with text, I see a lot of people kind of using the font adjustments when really they should be working with the boundaries of the element and changing those widths and heights. So the same thing for the height. I'm going to remove the minimum height, and now you can see the boundaries of that is perfectly around the text. So I'm not having any extra space happening here that I would have to account for if I'm going to introduce other elements that need to be spaced around it as well. So I'm going to center this now, like this, and I'm going to duplicate the text. I'm just using my keyboard shortcut, and I'm going to say sign up below to get started. And I'll take this one to a lower weight, maybe regular, and then maybe a smaller font size. Let's go to 14. Okay, so we have more of a heading and then kind of a subheading there. Next thing I'm going to do, we're going to create my inputs with the labels. So I'm going to copy this text here and give this a label of email address and add an input, okay, about that wide. I'm not going to have a placeholder here because I like to have my input labels outside so the user always sees the label. Placeholders are a way for you to create basically instructions or helper text sample values that are going to be faded in the input, and then as soon as they type in, it just goes over that. But once they type over it, they kind of lose their label, so I like to have labels outside. Okay, so this is going to be my email input. I'm going to make sure to label this email address so that I can identify it when I'm working in the workflows. And this is going to be format email address. With regular inputs like this, there's a number of different formats that Bubble can accept, and in some cases may even show different formatting to the user. So if you have the currency, for example, Bubble's going to show your currency symbol, or decimals, it will actually show the decimals. With a password, it will conceal the password with the dots. So just depending on what kind of content you anticipate to be entered in here, just pay attention. You might have a special type of formatting that you'll want to select. Emails specifically need to be set up as emails so Bubble understands that it is an email address. There's a lot of special things you can do with email addresses. Okay. Now, right now everything is just kind of vertically down the center. I want to group together my email input and this, my email address label and this input. So what I'm going to do is multi-select this text and this input by holding down my shift key. I'm going to click this one first, hold down shift, then click this one, and they're both selected as you can see. And I can either click on this kind of action button here, I can group them in a fixed container, or I can help myself by right-clicking, saving myself one step, and grouping in a column container. You can group in different containers here. I'm going to do that, group in a column container. So it's going to think about it. So now I have another container inside of my group form, right? Here's the text, there's the sign up text, and then here's my new group. I'm going to call this group email. Okay, very important to label as you go. It'll keep you very organized. Now, this group can be set up a little bit differently if I want. So for example, the email address text, I might want this left aligned so that it's to the left of, right, if we look at our demo here real quick, right, you see how these are centered technically in the form group, but the label is left aligned on top of that input. Now that I have this label and input pair organized how I want it generally within this group, I'm going to copy that whole group, right? I'm going to just use my shortcut Control C and then Control V. Now I have a duplicate and I can more quickly create the next input, which is going to be the password. Password is the label, and then this input, I will change this to password like that. Okay, let's create the next section here, which is the remember me and forgot password text. So I'm going to help myself a little bit just by getting started with a new group, just because of the sizing, so that I have the same widths. And I'll remove this input. Let's say this is the forgot password text. And we'll change the color of this to really highlight it for the user. I'm going to change the weight of the text. And this needs to be a part of a row, right? If I add my checkbox, let's search for checkbox over here, and add this to this group, they're going to stack in a column. I want them to be in a row so that they're in one single line. Let me move the checkbox ahead of the, before the forgot password. So I'll just shift it over. Remember, I can use these texts here like that. Okay. Now I'm going to change this container to a row container. So now they stack horizontally next to each other. Let me remember to rename my groups here. This is group password, and this one's going to be group checkbox and forgot, like that. Okay, so this row, which contains these two elements, I'm going to set up the alignment so that there is space between them. That way, this text is all the way to the right, and this checkbox is all the way to the left. Let's give our checkbox a label. This was the remember me checkbox. And I don't necessarily want the width of that checkbox to extend past it. I don't really need that. So I'm going to update the width settings of this checkbox, turn that off, remove the minimum, and have it fit to content. Same thing for the height. I'm just going to remove the minimum height so it fits perfectly around that checkbox. And you can see that this group is also much taller than I really need it to be. So at the group level, I'm also going to remove this minimum height that was just kind of created by default. There we go. So we have our elements here. Now you'll notice that I'm waiting until the end to create my spacing between everything. A lot of times I want to just focus more on the configuration of the layouts of all my specific elements and then clean up with all of the spacing, because oftentimes those things get changed as you go anyway. So just trying to keep my development more efficient here. The next thing is going to be the sign up button. Okay, so let's create a button here. This is going to say sign up like this, and the layout, I want to center it horizontally. You can see that the width of this button is a little bit wider than my inputs. We're going to address that in a moment. Right now, I just want the sign up button in there. Okay, the next thing I want to add is the other row. Let's actually go over to our preview here. Yes, the already have an account and then the login text. And it's going to be kind of similar to this remember me and forgot password. So I'm going to take that group and paste it as well. You see how it pasted it right after the thing that I copied from, so I can shift it down past the sign up button. I could have also picked it up and reorganized it. You see that bar there, that horizontal bar bubble, showing me where this would be positioned if I just dropped it anywhere there in the group. So I'm going to put it there. And I'm going to have this say, what was it? It was login and then already have an account. So let's actually get rid of the checkbox because these are going to be two texts. So this is already have an account like this, and this is going to be log in like this. I believe this one was more in the style of our labels and this text here. One thing I can do is copy this formatting. So copy formatting and then paste the formatting on this text like this. So now I don't have to go through and do all the same settings. It's a quick little shortcut for me. Now, in my previous design, you could see that these are more centered with a little bit of space in between them versus being spread out to the edges of their container. So I can accomplish that by going back to the group, and let's again rename our group here. Already have account. And the layout, I'm going to change this to a center alignment and add a little bit of gap spacing. Let's say maybe 10 pixels between them, maybe a little bit more, 20 pixels between them. So that they stay centered, but can then move outward from there. Okay, so now we can adjust our settings, our space settings and distribution and kind of get more consistent in our widths with our form here. First thing I'm going to do is have the group itself, the group form, fit its height to the content. So I want to remove the minimum height, but now I want to create some padding on the inner sides of this group so that everything inside can essentially stretch out, but then be pushed in so we have some border that's created. Let me show you what I mean a little bit better here. I'm going to actually remove from each of these groups the fit width to content setting. Okay, remove that. You see how it extends all the way to the width of the container. I'm also going to get rid of the minimum. Same thing here for password. Remove fixed width. Same thing for the individual inputs. Remove all of these fixed width settings so that it all stretches out. It's fully dynamic. Same thing for this group. And I'll tell you why that I'm doing this and not just creating independent like margin settings here. We're basically going to help ourselves make it easier to create consistency. So remove all of this. Okay, all I'm doing is removing the fit width to content and removing any minimum width. So everything is fully stretched out. Now, this group, I can come in and create some padding. Let's say we do 20 pixels of padding all the way around. Okay, now I have like a border essentially that has been created there. And because everything was stretched out, now we have much more consistent widths of everything. At the group level, I'm also going to finally add in my gap spacing. Maybe we do 20 pixels of gap spacing as well. Okay, now it's starting to look a little bit better. I'm also going to add a little bit of space between the input label and the input itself. So at that container level, okay, we're going to add gap spacing here. Maybe we do 10 pixels. Okay, same thing here for the group password, add 10 pixels. Okay, so now we're getting much more spacing in this form overall. One thing that I'm noticing is that both of these groups, they're top aligned on the page. You see that I have this extra space down here at the page. Now, page heights are going to be dynamic because different devices are going to be different heights. If you're on a mobile device, it's going to be smaller. If you're on a much larger monitor, it could be a lot taller. You have more space. What I want to do is just ensure that this group is always centered on the page for the user when they load their page. So this group left, what I'm going to do is change the vertical alignment away from the top aligned and have it stretch, which means it's going to expand to the full height of the page, whatever that height is. And again, because this group left isn't aligned to parent style, which means that the form here is at the center, it's just going to recenter itself. This is fully stretched to the page, and this is just going to stay centered. We're going to do the same thing with the blue group on the right, vertical stretch. Okay, so I'm going to close that so you can see what this looks like. Now we are starting to have our sign up form nice and organized. I promise the more you work with this, the faster you'll go through building out these things. I've obviously been talking through every single step of the way, but this is a kind of form that you can actually build quite quickly once you get the hang of all of the settings and all of the adjustments that need to be made. And also the shortcuts that you'll pick up for yourself for copying and pasting so you don't have to redo more than you really need. All right, so looks like we're looking pretty good here in terms of our, let me turn off the borders again. In terms of our form, it's this one here, right? Nice and clean, very evenly distributed, even widths. The only thing that I'm missing here is my image. So let me go ahead and add a new image element. And we're going to do this in the center nonent of my group. Let me go back to layout, center right there. And under the appearance setting, I'm just going to paste in that URL. So you can do that with images that are hosted elsewhere, or you can upload a new image, or your images can even come from your database. Lots of different options for you. Okay, so this image looks like it's pretty good in terms of, the aspect ratio and being displayed there. I'm going to make a couple of adjustments though. I'm going to have this aspect ratio fixed so that it's a perfect square. And because of that, now I can change the dimensions of that square. If I make it bigger, let's say 400 pixels, right now the image is a lot bigger, it's 400 by 400. If I go to 200, it's a lot smaller. Let's go back to maybe 300. Yeah, that feels okay. All right. So here we have it. There's our design for the form on the left, the image on the right, using all of the responsive settings so that everything is very neatly organized and consistent on the page. Let's go ahead and set up the workflow to complete the whole process and see our new user get created in the database. So as a reminder, going back to the data types under the user data type, your email address field is built in. You do not need to create another email field. Also, you might notice that there's no password field. That is intentional. It's hidden from you. You will not be able to see the passwords of your users. Bubble secures that. So we actually don't need to add anything extra to our data structure, but if I wanted to collect, for example, a name, let's just go ahead and add that in here to our form. So we're veering away from our original design, but that's okay. So let's do up here at the top, let's collect a name. And this input is going to be just a regular text so that they can type in their name. And I'm going to make sure to change the input name here so we can identify it. So this is name input, email, and password. Okay, so that way we'll have something to save to the built-in email field, the hidden built-in password, and also this custom field called name. Okay, so let's start our workflow. When this button is clicked, okay, I'm going to open up the property editor for this button and begin a workflow by clicking on this here, start edit workflow. When this button is clicked, we're going to add some action, right? So in our workflow section, we have our triggers, our events, in other words, and our actions. If this, then that. And the action can be one action, it can be a series of actions, and you have a number of different events that you can work with, a number of different triggers. What we're working with is an element trigger, when a specific element is clicked. And I could have built this from scratch here, by going to that event and then selecting my button. You'll notice that all of my visual elements that I've designed on my page are now available to me. That's kind of the long way around. A lot of your visual elements will have this option here to begin a workflow when it is clicked. Okay, so when my button is clicked, I want to sign up my user. So this is an account action. Lots of different account actions available to you. You can change credentials, you can reset passwords, you can actually create accounts for other people. So like an admin person can create a user account for somebody else. You can sign up with social networks. Those will involve plugins if you're going to do that. Yeah, and logging your user in, logging them out. If we take a look through some of these other categories, I mean, they're broken down into the most common pieces of functionality. So navigation, moving a user from one page to another, or working with your database, creating records, updating records, deleting them. You can export your data, sending emails, right? Payments here, the only reason we have actions here is because I have a Stripe plugin installed into this application. By default, you're not going to see anything here. But with the Stripe plugin, we can trigger all sorts of Stripe actions, creating subscriptions, making a payment, all of that. Element actions are more of those visual things on the page. So they don't really involve the database. It's more like I want to show a pop-up or show an alert message. Or reset my input so that they go back to being blank, right? A lot of things you can do there. If you are installing plugins that extend functionality, they may introduce more actions here. It just depends on what you have installed in your app. And then we have a couple of custom things that are a little bit more advanced. So all we want to do with this sign up is sign the user up. And you can see that Bubble is asking me for some required information, this stuff in red. Notice that I'm not doing any code. I'm just filling out the action settings as they're requiring me to. The email is going to be whatever the user typed into that email input. So this is your dynamic expression composer. Whenever you can insert dynamic data, this is where you find information from your page, whether they're coming from inputs, or like a file uploader or something, or from your database. We'll touch on this a lot more throughout the next demonstrations, but essentially what we're seeing here are the list of possible input sources, data sources, to insert here so that Bubble knows to sign the user up with this email. Pretty straightforward in our case. We just want to insert the value of the email input. Now, here's an issue. Two of our inputs are called the exact same thing. This is why we have to label our inputs properly. So let's just double check. I know I renamed this one input name. This one is input email address. This one is, our password has not been renamed. So let's rename it to input password. That way we can keep them apart. We don't run into any issues in the workflow. Okay, so here's our input email addresses value. There's a couple of other properties here, but we want to go to the value of that input, whatever the user typed in. Same thing for the password. Okay, if I had introduced another password field so they could retype their password just for confirmation, make sure there wasn't a typo, I could have Bubble require that, and I would provide that second password input's value here. I can choose to send an email to the user in order for them to confirm. Bubble will automatically send an email. The language of that email is actually managed in your settings, and Bubble will include a one-time use link for you so that when the user clicks on it, Bubble's going to mark them internally as confirmed. That's kind of a built-in piece of functionality that you can take advantage of. And then the remember the email is just so that when the user comes back to this page, the input will fill in with their email address. It's just kind of storing that information based off of cookies. So this is just looking for a yes or no value. We have provided a checkbox in the form, and a checkbox essentially outputs a yes or no value, right? It's either checked or unchecked. It's Boolean. It's true or false. So the way that we'll capture whatever the user chose is we'll reference that checkbox element. You can see that we don't have the equivalent here of these inputs. We don't have checkbox's value. Instead, we have two different ways of looking at whether the checkbox is checked or not. Checkbox is checked, we could do it that way, or checkbox isn't checked. What's really happening here is Bubble is making a true or false statement. This is either going to be true or false, right? So if we say, okay, the checkbox is checked, that is either true, right? If the user has checked the box, then this is a true statement. Bubble will set this value to yes, I want to remember the email. If the user left the checkbox unchecked, this is a false statement. And so the expression will evaluate to a no value. Remember the email? No, right? Because they left it unchecked. It's a little weird with checkboxes to get their values in there, but that's how you want to do it. Now we do want to update another field on the user record at the same time. So I clicked on this here so that I can map the name input to the name field in the user record. This is one of my custom fields that I created in my data structure. The name is going to equal the value of the input names, that element there, that element's value. Okay, so from one button click, Bubble is going to create a user account for the record. I said that very backwards. Bubble is going to create a record for the user and save their email, password, and their name, and this checkbox setting all in one go. So now that we've signed the user up, that's going to happen behind the scenes. The user record will be there, but on the front end, the user who's actually doing this, nothing's going to change for them. Visually, it's going to seem like it's broken, actually. Remember, you have to tell Bubble absolutely everything you want to happen. So let's do a couple things. Let's first reset the group so that it clears out all of the inputs. There's actually two ways to do this. We could reset the group, the form, which will take all of the inputs back to their default state. So they were all empty by default. Or I can say reset inputs, which will only clear inputs that were involved in the workflow. And we happen to have them all involved here, so this will also clear them out. So that's one kind of very subtle visual indicator to the user. They click on the button and the inputs will clear out back to empty. Another more helpful indicator is to actually show an alert message or a pop-up that says, hey, check your email. We sent you a confirmation link, or you are signed up, welcome. Or maybe even navigating them away from this page and going directly to another page, to a dashboard, to a user settings page, however you want that flow to go. We're going to keep this simple. I'm going to add an alert message to the page. We're just going to do it at the page level. And I'll put the alert at the top so that it's just centered there. And we can say, you are now signed up, like this. The way that alerts work are that they are hidden by default and you have to show them in a workflow. So this is not going to be present when we first load the page. But in our workflow, what we're going to do is go to this element action, show alert message, and Bubble's going to automatically select that element because it's the only alert we have designed on the page. If I had more, then I would be able to choose. And I can control the timing of this alert. Again, it's hidden by default, and when we show it in the workflow, it will fade in, hold, and then fade out. So I can control the timing here. It's in milliseconds. So right now, by default, it's set to fade in for half a second, hold for 2, fade out half a second. All right, let's try it out. I'm going to preview my page here. And we're going to sign up a new user and check our database and make sure that it was created properly. Okay, notice that when I clicked on preview, the debugger was added automatically. Essentially, this is a way for you to troubleshoot your designs, to troubleshoot your conditions. This is a way for you to inspect your elements, essentially. So this toolbar down here is the debugger. I can hit inspect, select any one of my elements, and it's going to give me all the properties for this element. I can see what things are in real time. Very, very helpful for troubleshooting. What I'm going to do for now, though, is remove the debugger from the URL, which will turn off that little toolbar at the bottom. The debugger also adds a little bit of extra white space, and I just want to be able to preview this page without it. So here's our design. I think our image is a little bit smaller than our original. Actually, let me toggle back and forth. There's our original. Here's the new one. It looks like I had the form a bit more narrow compared to the original, but hopefully you were able to follow along with where those settings would have happened for increasing the width a little bit or increasing the size of this image. Okay, so let's say we sign up Jane Doe, jane@sample.com, and we're going to use a password. And I'll say, remember me, and we'll click on sign up. Okay, so it's triggering the workflow. You see, there's my alert message up at the top. My form completely cleared out. So it's a good visual indicator. I had 2 visual indicators to the user that it was successful. In reality, I wouldn't want the user to just kind of be stuck here if there's no confirmation. If I was going to require confirmation, I would say, go check your inbox so that they can go do that, because the link will take them to a page of your definition once they have confirmed, and then they can move on from there. Or I would automatically redirect them at the end of the workflow, just run a go to page action and take them away. So they're not stuck here. You can ignore this. This is just a Chrome extension that I have installed that has nothing to do with what I designed here. So a good practice whenever you're creating data for the first time after setting up a new workflow or modifying data is to check your database and confirm that everything got created as expected. Now, again, we're not going to be able to see the password. Under app data, here are my users. So this was the newest user that I created. There's the email, there's the name, and we know we have our user in the system, which is fantastic. Okay, so that same process you'll be able to go through with any other data type. Now, this is a simple workflow, creating one record, doing just a couple of things after, but you can absolutely build more comprehensive things when it comes to user interaction in the application. You can have a big sequence of actions, you can trigger other workflows, you can work with multiple records at a time in a single workflow, modifying many things at once, or having things dependent on previous actions. And we'll get into some of that here with our next demonstrations. Last thing I just wanted to go through was some of the responsive settings. Remember, I had placed in my original a condition to have this entire right side hide once we're on a smaller screen. So let's take a look at how things are set up right now with the current settings in our responsive viewer. So if I just drag this in to see what will happen, things will start to squish. Like, this is not something that I want to happen. I want this blue group to go away earlier than this, I think. Right? Otherwise, we end up with this kind of collapsing behavior or this overlapping behavior. So let's add a condition to this group here. Okay, I'm going to go to the conditional tab, and I'm going to say when the current page width, creating my conditional expression, I can find the current page's width. This is a built-in value that Bubble makes available to us. When this width is, let's say, less than maybe 700 pixels. That would be a pretty large smartphone. So if we're, approaching a normal size smartphone, we want this to go away. So less than 700 pixels, I'm going to change the visibility property of the entire right group and make it not visible. I'm going to leave this unchecked. If we go to the layout tab, you'll notice that by default, every element you add to your design is going to be visible on page load. So you can change that if you want that behavior to be the opposite. Maybe by default, you want it to be hidden. So you would uncheck this. I am also going to collapse this group down when it is hidden. So if we are less than 700 pixels, I want to make this hidden, which will mean that the height of this group is going to fully collapse down. This is a good practice because if I had other elements designed on the page, I don't want to end up with a big gap just kind of hanging out there where this group would be. Collapsing things down basically means it fully disappears and things can shift around and take up that space. Again, depends on your design. You might not want that in certain situations, but just be mindful of that setting as well. So now if I go back to my responsive view, and you can see here that we're at, let's see, 899 pixels. I'm just going to slowly move down till we approach 700. I might even need to do this before then. Oh, there we go. Yeah, let's do it maybe before. No, I think that's fine. But what we do want to do is center. Okay, so if we're at this piece here, which is kind of like a, kind of close to a horizontal mobile or like a larger vertical portrait mode, what I want this group to do is center itself. So if I can open up the settings from here as well. So let's see why this one is not centering. Let's go to the row. Right. Okay. So at the page level, remember we set this in a row container alignment style or container layout style, and our row is left aligned. So we have the white group, and then right next to it is the blue group. But what I can do instead is have it center. So when they're both there, we don't really see a difference. But when the blue group is gone, this one is the only element in the row, and it's going to remain centered on the page. Right? If I change this to right aligned, you can see the difference here. So this setting helps me keep things nice and centered on that page, even with the blue group there. When the blue group comes back, it's back to normal, like this. Okay, so this 320 preset, okay, so we can see how things are getting really squished here, and that's because this form has no minimum width. We're allowing it to squish down very, very tiny. Let's maybe give it a minimum of 300 pixels. Let's try that. That looks a little bit better. By the way, 320 is on the smaller end for smartphones. Most smartphones these days are a bit bigger than this. But if we know that things look good, we can see everything, nothing's getting cut off, nothing's getting squished or overlapped, then we're in a safe zone for viewing these designs. So if I start at 320 and kind of work my way back out, you can see that it starts to expand because we haven't met the max width settings, right? And I can really play around with that. There's a lot of different variables that have to all work together, as you can see, to get really good looking responsive design. Hopefully, as you see me work through these, you can at least see where all of the components are. I could probably fine tune this even further to be even more specific with different breakpoints. Okay, now let's talk about bubble logic. We saw a little bit of this happening with our sign-up form, but we're going to take a deeper dive into it, particularly with dynamic expressions. Dynamic expressions and all of the possible data sources that are available to you are really what sets the Bubble platform apart from other website builders. This is how you can create really customized interactive applications. Okay, your data is custom organized within your database. Your front-end designs are custom configured, and it is up to you to manipulate the data that you're collecting from your users to put together the logic that you need for a custom experience and present everything to the user in an easy to consume way, in a way that's actually useful for them because they've come to your app for a reason, right? You might be solving a big problem. You might be making their lives easier in some way. And so this is kind of the heart of everything, is the logic that you create through these dynamic expressions. Of course, within the context of everything else, within the designs, right, the layouts, within the database architecture, and just the workflows. Dynamic expressions are really the building blocks of those workflows, of your conditions, to make things actually happen and to make things appear in the way that you want on the front end. So let's take a quick look at what I mean when I say dynamic expression and what I mean when I say data sources. Okay, so let's have a very simple example here. I'm going to add a text to my page, and immediately we see this little blue flag, insert dynamic data. Now, I could just type in a static text. I could say, hello world, right? It's me, and it will display exactly that. There is nothing dynamic about this. It is a fixed static piece of text. Or I could have dynamic data, which is information that can come from some source. Now, that source could be the database. It could be an input that's on the page. It could be a plugin. It could be another integration that you have with an API. A few different sources available to you. When you open up this expression composer, right? So that blue flag came up, I clicked on it, Bubble gave me this window. It's going to present me with my possible options. Now, it doesn't mean that every single choice can get me something that I want. It just means that I could potentially use that as a jumping point, because sometimes your expressions are going to be kind of a chain of things coming together to get the right result. For example, if I wanted to sum up an order total, I might look at the orders related line items, subtotals, and then add them all up. Right? So I'm going through like two different tables and performing a math calculation on a list of numbers from there. We will see that in one of our demos around the shopping cart. But this is the starting point here, is the list of data sources available to you. So an easy example is stuff that Bubble provides just automatically for you. So for example, the current date and time. This is a dynamic expression. The date and time is always changing. Right? So if I were to preview this page in this moment, when I load the page, Bubble's going to show me the current date and time. And if I reloaded the page after 2 minutes, that time is going to change, right? Right now it's 3:44 in the afternoon. If I refresh the page after 2 minutes, it's going to say 3:46. This is dynamic, right? I do not have to anticipate a date and time. Further, from your dynamic expressions, you may have the ability to manipulate them. So with a date specifically, right, I can click on this and you see there's a little text there that says more. I'll click on that. Now I can manipulate my date. I can extract different date components, right? I can just pull out the date of the month or just pull out the minute that I'm currently in. Or I can add time to this date and time. Maybe I want to set up a workflow where I'm defining an expiration on something. So when I want to save some records let's say it's a listing, right, in an auction type of website like eBay, and the user publishes their listing, and the application wants to save an expiration date of 30 days from now. So we'll take the current date and time and add 30 days, right? I'll just type in 30. So now this is a changed value. I'm going to refresh the page again. So today is August 9th. So it's going to add 30 days, and Bubble is doing calendar aware math here, right? We're not going to get a funky date. It knows that August has a certain number of days in the month before it needs to move into September. So 30 days from now is September 8th. So at the top, we have the most popular things. Current user is simply a shortcut to the user record of the person who is logged in. There's another way to get to that record, but this is, you're often referring to the current user. If the user is logged in, if they're logged out, if their user type is defined as an admin versus a customer or something, you can create a lot of conditions around who the current user is. And so the value of this is a user. Now Bubble is flagging this, it's in red. This is not a good expression because I'm in a text element. And this expression does not evaluate to a text. I have simply pointed to a user record, not a text. The record holds text values, such as the user's name, right? Like this. Now this is a good expression because it's compatible with my text element. And you're going to find that's a very important thing to be aware of when you're creating your expressions is compatibility of the value that you're trying to get to and the vehicle that you're putting it in. So if it's a text element like this, or if it's in a condition, or if it's in a workflow action, you need to make sure that things match, that the format of the value matches the thing that you're putting it in. Also, if it's a single value versus a list of values, that will also create some type compatibility issues if you don't have those right. We'll see other examples of those as well. So here I can display the current user's name. I believe I'm currently logged in as the user we signed up as, because Bubble will automatically log you in. So I should see, yep, there's my name, Jane Doe. I signed up as that person in our previous example. And so that's who we're seeing there. Another popular common data source, and one that you're actually going to use quite a lot, is this one right here, do a search for. This is how you search your database. You first have to define the data type, the table that you want to search, and then you can get specific from there. You can create constraints to find the exact thing that you want from there. So let's say I want to search through all of my users. And again, this is not a compatible expression because the result of this search is a list of users. I don't have anything that's actually text that can be printed as a text. I could go to the users. You see all these different manipulations here. I could go to the user's names, each item's name. So what I'm going to get here is every single user's names, just comma separated. Okay, so let me refresh the page here. Actually, I don't know if my users have, no, I think they do. I think they do. In the database, there we go. Yeah, those are my users' names in my database. This was the last one that was added. Okay. I could also just count up how many users I have, and I can mix and match my expressions in most places, not everywhere, but in most places I can mix and match dynamic with static. So I can say, give me the count of all of the users in my database, and just say, 10 users or 6 users. I'm not really sure how many I have in there. Let's refresh the page, and we'll see this come together, right? So I'm creating a more helpful display of this information. Sorry, it's in the upper left corner. I should probably put some spacing around there. But we see 7 users, right? This is a mix of dynamic information with some static information. Okay, so I just wanted to introduce you to the concept of data sources. So data comes from a shortcut to the current user, comes from a general search of your database, comes from information that Bubble just kind of has standing by at all times, and being able to manipulate those things. I'm going to show you one more, another one that's also common that we'll look at a bit more as well. If I have an input here, okay, and right, I can say maybe this input's placeholder says type in your name, okay, and this text is going to say another mix, hello, comma, and then we'll do the inputs value. Whatever I typed in there, hello, comma, and then the inputs value. Okay, so right now it doesn't say anything. I'm going to do hello, Gabby. Okay, so there's my name. It's just pulling directly. This is not coming from the database. It's just kind of a real-time reference to something that's happening on the page in that moment. Let's take a look at our next demo, the expense and budget tracking feature. This is not one that I'm going to build from scratch because there's a little bit more that's involved there. It would take a bit longer to get through everything, but I am going to walk you through the whole configuration so that you can pick up on those patterns in terms of layouts and responsive settings. But I am going to focus a bit more on the dynamic expressions being used here so that we can create a more interactive experience with the user. Okay, so here's the feature. We're on a new demo page here, and I am viewing this from a desktop perspective, but it has been designed for mobile. This is a page that has actually 2 pieces of functionality. First, the user can keep track of their budget across different categories. So let's say my food budget is $300, and it's going to calculate how much I've already spent on food this month. And the progress bar is going to dynamically show me where I'm at with my budget. It's also going to calculate how much under or over I'm at with that particular budget. So I know that I've spent $37.88. Let's say my budget was $50. Then I'm a lot closer to it. I'm a lot closer to meeting that limit. Or if I go down to 40, right? Now created a condition to change the color of the progress bar to really alert the user, hey, you are dangerously close to your budget. And so we can do this per category. If I change this to 300, right, I've given myself a bigger budget, so I'm not so close to the limit there. Supplies, let's change this to 500, even more. So this is all interactive. Keep in mind, when I change these numbers, I am actually affecting the database. It happens very fast. It's just kind of in the background. Every time I change the input, it's modifying a record, a budget record that is tied to the user and tied to this category. I'll show you the structure in a moment here. So if you keep in mind these numbers, 40, 300, 500, I'm going to refresh the page. And what should happen is it should remember those numbers because I have it set up to automatically populate them when I first load the page, 40, 300, 500, there we go. Okay, so that's one piece of functionality that's on this page. Now I've got a little handy menu here to switch over to a different piece of functionality. Note that we're on the same page. How I did that was actually toggled between two different groups that both live on the page, but only one is visible at a time. So here are my expenses. So here I have a list of all of the expenses I've created. Now this is leveraging an element that we haven't talked about yet called the repeating group. Super helpful, very powerful for working with dynamic lists, right? I did not sit here and go through and design, how many do we have here? 5 different rows of items so that they all look the same and populate with item 1, item 2, item 3, etc. I used a repeating group. Bubble only asked me to design one cell and it could replicate that design for me. And I structured it so that it's in a vertical, kind of like a table format. You can use repeating groups to show more of a grid. You can have multiple columns. They can be scrolling. But the important thing is that the repeating group is connected to a data source, some list of items so that each cell's information can be dynamic. They're each different. Now these records are coming from the database, right? I told the repeating group to go look at all of my expenses tied to the user who's logged in, right? I don't want to look at other people's expenses. And populate with this information. The other thing the user can do here is, well, you can see this aggregation. We're summing all of the expenses. I can filter it by category, so filter by food. It filters it down, only shows me the food items, travel, supplies. I can, undo it so that I see everything again. And I can have the user add a new expense in the same place. So I clicked on that button, take a look at this, the whole list went away. That was intentional. I want their attention to be here. Also for a mobile design, it would have gotten kind of clunky to have both things there at the same time. It would have been a lot of scrolling up and down. So I just have the form. If I change my mind, I don't want to add an expense, I can hit discard and it takes me back here. Or let's go ahead and fill one out just as an example. Let's say August 31st, $50. Let's say travel, gas and snacks like this. And I also have a file uploader to upload, a picture of my receipt, for example. I'll skip that for now. Add expense, and you can see there it is, travel, gas and snacks, my description for that particular date and for that amount. And so it added to my total. If I go over to my budget, you saw right there, the progress bar moved just a little bit because I added to my travel total. And so now I'm a little bit closer, $50 closer to my travel budget. Okay, so let's dig into how this was put together. I really want to take you through all of the dynamic expressions, especially, but we'll also take a look at the structure here. So on this page, this is my editor, you'll notice that first thing, the width of the page is set to a mobile preset because I designed this to prioritize usage on mobile devices. Remember on the sign up demo, I had it set to a full width, so I had a bit more width there, but here I'm going to keep things more narrow. Now, if we look at the elements tree, I can see the hierarchy of all of my elements. So first we have my header group. Okay, you'll notice that this is an align to parent style so that this text is in the center and my little menu icon here is over to the right. By the way, this menu icon is actually coming from a really handy plugin that Bubble has called Slide Bar Menu for very basic menus. You can, of course, create more comprehensive menus with like sub-menu items and different colorings and things like that. But this gave me what I needed to toggle between my two sections. So this was my header right there, and you can see inside, those are my two elements, okay? Notice how I'm labeling everything as I went. There's my image just as a kind of a main image to always have at the top there so that the user knows where they are. And I have two separate groups, group budget and expenses. Now you'll notice that group budget is visible by default here in my editor because that's how I've designed it. Let me click on here. In the settings, by default, when the page is loaded, it is going to be visible, but it is going to collapse when hidden versus group expenses, okay, is going to be hidden by default, also collapsed when hidden. Okay, so we only see the budget group first. Now notice they're both in the same page, and the page is set to a column structure, so they technically stack on top of each other. But when this group is hidden, the expenses group, again, I have it set to collapse when hidden. So when it is hidden, the height goes away and everything below it shifts up. And that's how we're able to see everything basically in the same position on the page, right? When I go over to budget, this stuff isn't pushed down. I don't have a bunch of extra white space here. That expense group is completely collapsed down, so this section can shift up into that space. This repeating group is how we can see all of our expenses in a list. Actually, what I'll do is I'm going to back up one step. Let me walk you through the workflow for creating a new expense record, because that will help explain our list of expenses in this repeating group. So when this button is clicked, let's go over here. You can see this button is serving a dual purpose. If the form is not visible, it's first going to show the form. If it is visible, then it's going to go through and create a new expense record in my database. And then it will reset the inputs and it will hide the form. So this is similar to how we did the sign up. We just capture the information from all of those inputs, map them to the right fields in our expense data type. So it was our responsibility to create the expense data type properly for those pieces of information. These fields here with the number, the date, the text, a relationship to an option set, right? I have an option set of expense types, food, supplies, travel, so that every individual expense has a value for these things here. And I can check my data in a more raw format by going to app data, expenses, and I can see those records there as well. But presenting it to the user, I might want to do it in a more designed way, right? So that's exactly what we have here with the repeating group. Okay, so let me close this again, go to our repeating group. Okay, so a repeating group, again, is specifically for a dynamic list. We first need to tell Bubble that this is a list of expenses. We need to define the type, and then tell Bubble which expenses we want to see. We may not want to see every single expense in the data source or in the database. So here I've done a search for, remember it was the do a search for, and I chose the expense data type. So I'm searching through that table specifically, and I have a filter, I have a constraint on this search. I only want to see expenses that match the type that was selected by this dropdown. So that's how I was able to, in real time, choose a different type in the dropdown, and it affected the data source in real time. Without this constraint, the search is going to return all expenses. With this constraint, it will have a filter so that it returns expenses based on that type there. Now, I do have an additional setting here for Bubble to ignore the constraint if I've left the dropdown empty, so that I can see everything by default if I don't want to specify a type. One thing that I would add here in a real-world scenario is another constraint on the owner of the expense, for example, the creator. So I might want to show expenses created by the current user and only by the current user. This way I'm not seeing other people's expenses. You know, if you have multiple people signing up to the application, they're creating their own expenses, we don't want to see other people's stuff. So creating this type of condition ensures that it filters it only to the user's own expenses. You can also protect this kind of data even more with privacy rules. So you can create a rule that says, hey, if the expense creator is not the current user, they should never have access to that data. But it's a good practice, good habit to create constraints like this even within your visual elements. Okay, I'm going to remove it right now because I am not logged in as the creator and I just want to be able to see the data here. Now, the repeating group is, again, a way for you to generate a list automatically from one cell's design. So you can see that there's a repetition, it's faded from this design here. I only needed to set up this one cell. So if I open up my repeating group, we can see how it was put together. We have a group inside of it, and then inside of that group, more groups here. This is where I was custom mixing and matching my layout styles. So you'll notice that there is a row, right? There's let's see, this is the date, the description, and then the amount, all in a horizontal row. But within those individual components, we have a column to display the, let's see, this is the date month, and I've got it converted to uppercase. You can see this manipulation here that I'm doing on a date. And then below, I'm displaying the date, the actual date, again, uppercase. Okay, so those are in a column within a container that's a part of a larger row. So that's why all of these different groups are here. You're going to see this a number of times throughout these demonstrations, how much I'm leveraging groups, how much I'm taking advantage of containers, because containers can have different layout styles. You can add global margins or padding to create more uniform spacing of things. Yes, in theory, you could also add a lot of margins and padding, around individual elements too, but you're likely creating more work for yourself. Start on the outside, work your way in. Okay. Also, this particular group date, you can see there's a faint blue border because I was able to custom style the borders. Look how specific we're getting with these designs. I can define every border independently, top, right, left, and bottom. And I said, I only want a right border. I want it to be 1 pixel, and I want it to be this color, and it's a solid line, not a dotted or dashed line, just so that I could create some separation there. Okay, and I made this bold, right? So this is ultimately what we end up getting. Let me refresh the page again to remind you of the design. Okay, right, so that's how that all turns out. Now, the group that's inside of the cell, you can see that its data source is the current cell's expense. This concept of passing data from one source to another is also very important in Bubble. All of these elements inside need to carry that cell's data, so that one expense. So if we return 10 items, we're going to have 10 rows that are generated for us. First row is the first expense, second row is the second expense. It represents those results. And I want to carry that information into these inner groups because ultimately I need to display something like this in a text. The parent group expense, so it's referring to the record, expense type, that's the option set field that the record is tied to, and then the display, this is the option set choice. Okay, the name of the choice. Technically, option sets can have additional attributes. We have not done that. That's more advanced. You don't always need those. But we do need to tell Bubble, hey, this is an option set choice, and we just want to go to the name of that choice. Let's do a slightly easier one here. The parent group's expense, this is the record, and then we go to the amount, that's a numerical field, and here we're formatting that number as a currency because we know that this is an actual price that has been paid. It's not just a straight decimal or a whole number. We want to show it as money that has been paid. Okay, so in order for this text to display properly the cell's expense information, it needs to have access to the data source from the repeating group. And we have so many nested layers in here, we don't want to cut off that access to the cell's data source. So the first group is also going to hold basically a shortcut to the expense. Okay, so the group is also type expense. The data source is coming from the cell. The groups inside of that are also going to be the same thing, type expense. Their data source is their parent group. So the parent group of this is this one here. The parent group of this is the cell, right? The parent group of the repeating group is group expenses, right? You just work up the chain, okay? And if that data is flowing through all the way, then we will be able to display all of our information properly. I'm going to show you one thing. What if I cut off our data source at this group level here? Let's just collapse this down. This group level, which contains everything else inside. If I remove that data source, First of all, Bubble's not even going to yell at me about it. There's no issue that's been generated. This is something that you need to just learn and understand, that if you're going to display things inside of a group, you need to check your data sources, because not all groups have to have a data source. Some groups can literally just be containers to keep things together. But if I cut off the data source, I removed it, does not matter if the groups inside have this set up. It does not matter, because their parent group, which is this one here, does not have a data source. It's missing. So if I refresh this page, we're going to end up with an empty list. The cells will be generated, but none of the content will actually display. So let's switch back over to expenses here. Look, they're gone. We've lost the data source. This would be a great use case for the debugger to help troubleshoot what's going on here. I would have been able to identify that one of my groups was missing a data source, because I would have seen that it was empty. I could have gone to each of the individual texts and seen, hey, there's no value there. But I know that this is set up to show the expenses amount. I know that the group of the amount has a data source. What about the parent of that group? I go here, okay, there's my missing piece. This stuff you have to learn. It's just gonna, the more time you put into it, the more second nature it will be to just be mindful of all these things. So data source is the current sales expense. Okay, let's talk about some calculations. This total that we have here, so this is a real-time calculation. I'm actually going to build this from scratch here so you can see. I just want to add up all of the expense amounts that we're seeing in the list here. So I'm going to refer to the repeating group. Again, technically I could do a search. I could do a straight search of the database directly based on the filter, the type, on the user who created the expenses, but I don't need to do that. Bubble's already done the search for me. Bubble has already sent the data to the browser. So for performance reasons, I want to consolidate my references a little bit. This repeating group has already done the search. So I'm actually going to piggyback off of the repeating group expenses. Okay, it has a list of expenses. There's my data source. And I'm going to go to each of those expenses amounts. Okay, now I have a list of numbers, and Bubble will even keep track of where I'm at. If I hover over this, tells me this is evaluating to a list of numbers. And then I'm going to sum that list of numbers. What can I do with the list of numbers? Well, these are my options, right? The list of choices you have here just changes based on what your last value was in your expression. So I'm going to sum this. So now I'm going to have my sum, but I want to make sure I present it as a currency. So I'm going to click more one more time and format this as a currency. Let's do 2 decimal places and a thousands separator with the dollar symbol. Okay, and we end up, I just recreated what was already there, but we end up with this here. Okay, now let's switch over to the budget group so we can see how we did those fancy little progress bars. Okay, so here we do have another repeating group. Let's open this up over here, this repeating group budget. Now, this is searching through a different table. Let's go over to the database and just take a look at that table. So here are my expenses, right? The budget data type is a different table with these 3 records for a specific user. So one user might have a $300 travel budget, another user might have a $50 travel budget, which is why we created this in a separate table, right? Because these amounts per expense type are unique to a user. So when I'm looking at the budgets for a user, I want to show all of the budgets, and here I would add a constraint where the creator of that budget, created by, equals the current user. I did create these manually in the back end, so this isn't going to actually show anything if I were to preview it here, but this is how I would structure this so that I'm not seeing other people's budgets. Okay, so I only have 3 records in the database right now, so this will return what I want. This search will return those budgets, and inside of my repeating group design, again, I'm only designing one cell. Bubble will replicate that for me. There's lots of settings around the repeating group to set up the size of the cell, how many rows, how many columns, because it's a list. You can create actual tables, grids, scrolling functionality within them. I have a group here, again, to customize my formatting and design. I can give it a background color and create some roundness around there. I can create more spacing. You see I have some margins there, 10 pixels in the top and the bottom. And this is also passing through the budgets source into the rest of the group, right? It's pulling from the cell. Now the group is carrying through that data source, and we have this group at the top, which is set to a row layout. You can see the alignment space between. So I have this item inside to the very left edge, this input over to the right, to the very right edge. And then the group down below, which is also made up of another group, right? I'm mixing and matching layout styles to get things positioned exactly where I want it by leveraging multiple containers, okay? So this input, the user can type in their own budget. By default, it's going to display what is currently their budget from the database. And so we did that with an initial content, the parent group's budget's amount. Parent group's budget's amount, that's the record's amount value, that number field. Parent group of this input is this group. Parent group of that group is this group, right? And this group is pulling from the cell. So we can display by default, AKA the initial content, what they currently have. As soon as you load the page, that's what will show there. But it's an input, it's something they can interact with, and so they can change the number. And what we have attached to this input is a workflow to update the record and change the amount field to whatever they've typed into the input. So if I go to my workflows and go into this event here, right? When the input's value is changed, it's going to make a change to the budget record. So that came from this action here, make a change to a thing. I'm not creating a new thing, not deleting, I'm not signing up a user. I'm making a change to something. And so Bubble's going to ask me, what thing do you want to change? What record do you want to change? It has to say thing because it doesn't know what my data types are. And I want to change my budget. And so here are my options from my data source. You see that now I have a more limited list here. There's only so many sources that will allow me to get to a record to change. But it's going to show the most relevant things at the top. So this input, excuse me if you heard a sound there, I just knocked my microphone. This input is sitting inside of a group that has a data source. And so it's going to give me that as an option. I want to change that record. And the thing about this that I'm going to change is the amount field. And I'm going to change it to this input's value. It says this input, right? This input, because I've triggered this entire workflow from that input. So it gives me that little shortcut, which is nice. Notice that I don't have to define other fields here. The only thing I care to change is the amount. Everything else will stay put as is. The category will be the same. The creator will be the same. Nothing else changes. Okay. I don't even need another kind of indicator here. I really want this more to be like a in real time Bubble changes, or the user types in a change and it automatically, it's like an auto save type of functionality. There is technically an official auto save. It's called auto binding that Bubble has. We're not going to touch on that one today, but what we've created here is essentially that type of experience. And so so there's a ripple effect that happens here. The moment I change my budget amount, it updates the database. This progress bar is dependent on the value in the database. So if it updates the database, it updates the progress bar. And it's also going to update my other calculation that I have over here in this text to tell me, this is actually happening in conditions, whether I'm over or under. So you see, we're getting a lot fancier now, right? A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about is now coming together in a lot of different ways here throughout these conditions. So let's look at the progress bar. This is another plugin that Bubble has, very easy to use. You just provide a percentage number. So you could do something that's fixed, you could type in a number, or you can have a calculation that happens in real time. So what I've done here is I searched for expenses for the expense type that is this cell. Remember, this is a list of budgets, so every budget is per type. So I'm trying to calculate where I'm at in my progress for this type. So I'm going to search for all of my expenses first. I need to see where I'm at for my expenses for this type only. So the expense type has to equal the budget's expense type. I'm going to take the sum of those expense amounts. So let's say for supplies, I have spent $100. So here's my sum. Now I'm going to divide it by my budget. I'm just doing math now, right, for this particular feature. If I have a number, I can do different math operations. Okay, I can do all my standard operations. I can find, I can do rounding. I can find the minimum of a list. I can find the maximum, average, all of that. So I'm going to take my amount that I've spent, divided by the actual budget for this cell. And because this progress bar needs the percentage in a whole number, we're just going to multiply it by 100. Otherwise, I would get a decimal. This text below is calculating just the sum of the expenses. So it was actually just part of what I did in the progress bar. Search for expenses based on the type, summing the amount, and then formatting it in a format that makes sense for the user to see it as a currency. And then I just combined it with some text here. This text is conditional. So by default, it will say at budget. But if we calculate that we are below budget or over budget, then it's going to change the color and also change the text. So here we're doing the same math as the progress bar, but now comparing it to another number. So if my percentage is less than 100, right? Less than 100%. Like if I'm less than my budget, then I'm under it. So I do the calculation again and just say under. If I am over 100%, then I've exceeded my budget, and we're going to change the font color here of the text and also display a different text. The progress bar itself also has a condition to say once we reach 80% or greater, we're going to change the color. So it's kind of like a visual warning for the user. Once this calculation is at 80 or above, we let the user know, hey, you're getting dangerously close to that budget. This is something that we see a lot in financial-based applications, but also dashboards, analytic type of features, aggregating on data that is being generated by your users, whether it's for an admin or for the users themselves. Just taking the data that's already there, right? It's the raw data that is already here for budget and for expenses. Notice that we have not saved totals to the database. We technically don't need to. We could. In some cases, you might want to have pre-calculated values, especially if you have more complex expressions. But we're trying to leverage a good balance between what do we actually need to have in the database and what can Bubble just do in real time on the page for us? What can the user provide us that we don't know, that we can leave up to them? And they can see, represented in a certain way, right? The progress bar, that's a design choice. We could have shown this with a chart. We could have shown this with just the text and the color coding. But part of the way that you put your features together has to be to serve the user's experience and actually make things useful for them. And so the way that you design some of your data structures, some of your layouts, they need to help each other so that you can get the right experience like this. This is super obvious to me. Oops, I am like very close. I don't even need to see the numbers. I'm very close to my food budget. I should cut back. All right, the next demonstration we're going to jump into is user-to-user messaging. This is a super popular type of functionality that can happen many ways in all sorts of applications, social networks, project management, internal, team updates and things like that. Our example is going to be from the perspective of a chat support agent communicating with customers. So this is a one-to-one communication, but just know that you can absolutely create group chats, forums, right, where multiple people are creating a post and other people can comment on them, create sort of a thread situation, or you can evolve this into more of like an inbox situation. So lots of different ways to do messaging in general. Again, it all comes down to how you structure your database and of course how you present the UI to your users. I am currently logged in as an admin user who is going to be communicating with all of these customers that we have on the left. By the way, if you go to your user table here under app data, Bubble has a really helpful function for running as that user. This is an admin function only, system admin, right? You as the owner of the application. Also, any collaborators that you might add to your editor may have this functionality as well to run as a user in the system. What that does, Bubble logs you in as that person. You experience the app as them. Really helpful for troubleshooting and testing things out. So I'm currently running as this user here, and I have 5 conversations going. We can see that each of them have a different status. The one that's waiting is going to just keep track of how long they've been waiting. These individuals, the date or the timestamp is just the last message that was sent. I can also filter my conversations if things get crazy to keep myself on top of everybody, right? Maybe I want to filter by all the people that are waiting, all the people that are active, so that I can filter out anybody that's been closed, or I can just see everyone all together here. So we have a very clear left side and right side for this design. I can select a specific conversation. You see how the list of messages actually scroll down to the end for me, which is really convenient. If I go to let's go to actually back to the waiting one, you'll notice that we haven't started the conversation yet. And so I have kind of an empty state design. So I don't have anything blank in there. It doesn't look broken, but this is basically telling me we don't have any messages to show. It's a nice little design to keep it with the theme of the rest of the page here. If I go into an active message, just to show you what, different options I have here or how this has been put together. So every side, just like a standard kind of popular chat, is going to represent a different user. So on the right side, we always have the chat agent. On the left side, the customer. And we have the message itself and a timestamp of when that message was created. I want you to pay attention to some of the styling choices here. The width of these chat bubbles fit to the content. And they only go so far, right? They don't go all the way to the end, right? This is going into 2 lines. It technically could have extended all the way to the end where this picture is, but it's getting cut off so that it can be more visually clear to the user that there's a left side and a right side and not too much overlap to create any confusion. Okay, so there's one thing, that we have some max widths being set here. The other thing is that the roundness of this chat bubble is round on 3 corners only. This 4th corner is a hard corner for the left side, whereas the upper right corner is a hard corner for the right side. And that's just to create a very subtle detail to make it look more like a chat bubble, right? Where it kind of comes into a point into the direction of the person speaking. And that was just done with manipulating individual borders and individual roundness from there. Notice that the timestamp is on the left side for the chat agent, whereas the timestamp is on the right side for the customer. And we also have them, as you can see, for the customer, it goes from left to right. Everything reads in that direction. The bubble expands in that direction, whereas the bubble expands from right to left on the other direction. The support agent can also change the status of the conversation. So let's say they change this one to closed. Okay, so we'll see this status changes there. That's just updating a field in the conversation thread record, which we'll look at in a moment. I'll change this back to active. And if I go over to this conversation, we also have a really popular type of feature, which is including attachments with the message. So there's a conditional group here to display a link to open up a file if that message has a file with it. Otherwise, that group that would contain that link is collapsed in all other instances of our messages here. I'm going to type in a message as the chat agent. Let's say, thank you for sending that over. I'm just testing another message. Okay, and send, right? There's my next message. There's the latest timestamp. It's just the following message for this chat person. If I wanted to attach something, I have this little paper clip here. It's going to show me a nice little pop-up with either an option to discard, which will just close the pop-up, or I can choose to attach a file. Let's see if I can pull one up. Okay, so I've selected a file and it's going to attach here. This is just a CSV with some sample data, and you'll notice that it's actually displaying it down there. Now, if I hit discard, it will clear this and just, again, close the pop-up and return me to empty. But I'm going to go ahead and attach it, which means it's just going to close the pop-up and keep this here. This is displaying, again, conditionally based on that file uploader in the pop-up having a value. If we know we've uploaded something there, it's going to display it here, and then I can say, here is another file for you too. Now, I can't actually remember if we designed this piece here on the right side, so it's possible it might not show up. Let's do a quick send. Oh no, there it is. That's good. And so here I can click on this, And because this is a CSV, it's just going to download it to my computer. This one is an image, and so the browser should be able to handle that and actually display that image there. That's our logo right there. Okay, so let's jump into the editor so we can see all the different components to make this happen, both in the workflows, but also in the layout decisions here. So again, we want to start from the outside and work our way in. At the page level, we're going to go to the layout. This is a column, and we have some 20 pixel row gap between the column elements, which are our header and a kind of a master group called group conversations. Okay, so it's really between this group up here and a group down here, which is made up of the left and right side. So the list of threads on the left and then the messages on the right. So the group conversations is set up as a row. So again, going back to our first demonstration with the sign up form, we did the same thing, right? We have the threads on the left, messages on the right. They are centered with some 10 pixel spacing in between them. That little sliver of vertical space between the two here, that's that gap spacing right there. If I change this to 40 pixels just to exaggerate it, you see it opens that up a bit more. I'll undo that for now. So on the group thread side, we have this set up as a column. And notice that this one has 15 pixels of padding on the top and the bottom, 10 pixels of padding on the left and the right. So we have a bit of a border, around all of these inner elements. We don't necessarily want all these things touching the full edges. Otherwise, it would feel too tight, like not a lot of breathing room there. This group threads, as you can see, is made up of some other containers. We have the group at the top with the count, the total number of our conversations. So it's just going off of the repeating group of threads and counting them and then just displaying the word conversations. Over here we have a drop down so that the user can filter the threads by the status. So the drop-down is an input type of element that can pull its choices dynamically from your database or from your option sets. So here it's pulling from our support status option set. That is the type of choice. The source, we just want all support statuses. So if we go into the option set tab here and go to support status, I want to show all of these. In theory, you could have the drop-down only show some of these if you wanted. You could filter out certain choices. But it's a dynamic drop-down. It's pulling from our option set, and that way the user can choose. Let's take a quick look at the data structure before we go into the rest of the elements for the data types that are involved here. So we're looking at these two with the icons. By the way, and I don't think I've mentioned this yet, the icons in front of each of these data type names I added manually just so that I could organize my data types feature by feature. Bubble will automatically sort these alphabetically, but I sometimes like to put icons in front of data types that are actually related to each other for functionality. It might not make sense for all applications, but it does make it easy for me to find, these two were unique to the budget and expense tracker. These two data types are relevant to the messaging example we're looking at now. And then we've got 4 data types actually that all work together for our next demonstration, working with a shopping cart. So the thread is the parent record to organize a list of messages together, right? So a thread is going to be with a specific customer. This is a relationship to a user. The support status is going to be from the option set, okay? And then a separate table of records is going to be for each individual message. Each message is tied to a parent thread. We have the content of the message itself, and the message may or may not have an attachment. So not all messages will have a value in this field, that's okay. But they are going to have some content. So if we go over to the app data to see kind of the raw format of our messages, here they all are. There's all the content. You can see 2 of them have attachments. This is the one that I just created. And they have all a parent thread. Now let's take a moment here to talk about this relationship field. Notice that the value that we see here is a unique ID. Okay, if we go over to the threads table, I can see this was with, who was this with? Ninel. Okay, so that's this record here. This is the thread that is active that I am currently working with, that the last message that I had sent. Now, if I open up this record, I can see the unique ID of this thread. It ends in, let's see, 202-900. Okay, if I go back to the messages, so this was the message that I added to this thread, you can see 202-900. This field is simply relating to that entire thread record. Not the thread status, not the thread creation date, not the thread customer. It's the whole object, the entire record. And from this particular view, it is represented by the unique ID. Let's go back to looking at the structure of these elements here. So this is a repeating group of threads. We're searching for threads. We have a potential filter here. If I have something selected, then it's going to filter by the support status. And right now the threads are sorted by their modified date. So you can add some sorting functionality here. Inside of this repeating group, we have some more containers so that we can set up our layouts properly, right? So this one is the main group that contains everything. That way we can create some roundness, some spacing that is set up as a row. Inside of the row, we have the left side of the row to show the picture, the name, the timestamp there. On the right side of the row, I think that is going to be this one. Nope, it is the text is the only thing on the right side of the row to display the status. The status text, okay, over here, parent groups, threads, support statuses display. This is going to have a bunch of conditions to change the color of the font. Okay, so it's not three separate texts. You could do that. It would kind of be the long way around. It's not three separate texts that show conditionally and others hide. We're just changing the appearance based on the data tied to the thread. So if the status is active, you can see here I can choose for my option set choices. This is another example of why option sets are great to leverage if you can. Bubble kind of bakes in those values into your editor. You will never see something like this coming from your database records. You won't ever see like email addresses filled in here from your users. This is only an option set thing. So anyway, if the status is active or the status is waiting, right, we change those colors there. On the right side, we have more conditional things. Let's close this down, open this one up. Let's open up the repeating group of messages. Now here's how we achieve this left and right side functionality. We have two groups. One of them is designed for the left side, one of them for the right. Now they are conditionally visible based on who sent the message. So this is a repeating group. The outer element is a list of all messages tied to the thread. Okay, so I'll go over the passing of data in a moment. Basically, you click on a thread here, it's going to pass that data over to the right side. So the right side's data source is very dynamic. It changes every time you select one. It updates the data source of the group, and so therefore we see different messages automatically populating here. So we have a repeating group of the messages for this thread, and two groups inside of that repeating group. Now we don't want to show both groups at the same time. We only want to show one. So these groups are hidden by default. Both of them are actually. This one's hidden by default, collapse when hidden, and I've named it. Message from the customer. This one here, message from the agent, also hidden, collapsed when hidden. And the condition will dictate when it becomes visible. If the message's creator's user type, right, the creator is a user. If the creator's user type is admin, this is another option set. If they're an admin, then we show this group. Versus in our other group, if they're a customer, then we show this group. If I go back to my user table here, we should be able to see there's only one admin and I'm running as that person right now. And everybody else is a customer. So any messages that these people create will always show on the left side. So again, this page has been designed from the perspective of the support agent. It's like their portal, seeing all the messages from their customers. The customer facing could probably be designed differently because they're not looking at multiple threads. They're just looking at their one chat with the agent. But those conditions will dictate which group is visible. Now these groups are designed very similarly, but with opposing alignment settings. So the row up at the top here for the customer message is going to be left aligned, whereas the group down here is going to be right aligned. Everything is right aligned. The group itself here, I'm going to go to the appearance property. Here's where we independently defined all of the borders. The roundness is 10 round on only 3 of the borders. We left it with no roundness. It's a sharp corner on the top left there. And then the opposite on this group down here, right? So this one is the sharp corner. Everything else has roundness. Change the colors of the background. These groups themselves, they are also row styles so that there could be a little bit of spacing. You see a 10 pixel column gap between the message itself and then the picture. Inside of the little chat bubble, that's set up as a column, right? So we have the content in a slightly larger font, and then the creation date in a smaller font. You see that the creation date here is left aligned, where the creation date over here is right aligned. That way they show kind of in the corner of the message. Okay, so we're just passing that content through the data through to these messages so that we can see all of that information. Let's go through the workflow for that particular thing. So this group here is going to trigger a workflow to pass data from this cell over to this group on the right, which we called group messages. Okay, so I can get to this workflow very quickly by going to this little inspector tool here. This shows me a few other pieces of information, shows me basically what involves the group. And I can see that there's an event attached to this group whenever this group is clicked. Okay, so if I click on that, Bubble's going to take me straight to the workflow, which is very handy, especially if you have a lot of workflows on your page. So when this is clicked, I'm going to run a display data action. This is passing data from the cell to the right side group. That right side group's data source is going to change. That's what this action does, is it changes data sources. So we're going to change the data source of group messages, that's the right side group, to whatever the current cell's thread is, whatever thread I clicked on to see. I want to add a little pause. This was just a design choice, but I added a 1/4 second pause before it does a scroll to the last message in the repeating group. Because by default, Bubble's actually going to show me the top of the list, top of the repeating group. And so I want it to scroll automatically to the last item. And so it will go all the way to the end. And I have it animating the scroll. These are all actions that came from, the preset list of actions. Display data is an element action because we are changing the data source of a group. That's right there. The pause is a navigation action right there, adding a pause. And then the scroll to entry, I believe that's an element action, which should be right here under the repeating group, functionality here, scroll to specific entry. So when that data source is changed, let's jump over to that group. Here's a little shortcut. You can right click on these things and do a few different actions. I'm going to reveal the element and Bubble will take me right to that group. It's going to highlight it so that I can see it. And here I can see by default, the data source of this group is just going to be the first thread in our list of threads on the left. That way, when I first load the page, I always see at least something to start out. But this data source gets overridden in the workflow. Whenever I click on a new thread, it'll change. Okay. And then everything inside from there is just going to pull from that group's data source, right? This group is looking at the parent group's thread. Let's take a look at the functionality around the input here. So this is another group. It looks like one big input, but it's actually a group with a background color. There's an input inside of it that has no border, so it kind of like fits into the group seamlessly. So here's our input, enough space to type in a good message, to set up as a text. We have a link icon, a little paperclip icon, and a send button. Okay, so the paperclip icon is just going to show the pop-up that we've designed here. I think this is probably the first pop-up that we've had so far. Pop-ups just live kind of on top of everything else in your design. And they're always hidden by default. You have to show them in the workflow. So when the paperclip is clicked, it's going to show this pop-up. And it's also going to pass the thread to the pop-up as well. You see the pop-up is another container. And it can also hold a data source. So by default, there's no data source because we know it's going to be changed in the workflow. And the only way the pop-up is going to show is if we're coming from a message, or from a thread, I should say. So clicking on this paperclip here shows the pop-up and displays the data to that pop-up. So that when we are ready to attach, we know which thread we're going to attach it to. I say that, and now I'm remembering that I don't think there is I don't think that workflow is working that way anymore. I think it used to, but now it's no longer. Let's just take a quick look. Attach. Yeah, I don't think we even need a data source. We don't need a data source in the pop-up. So that, because the pop-up's actually not referencing the thread in any way, it's really just holding the file uploader. Okay, so the file uploader is a type of input element that you can grab from your input forms here. You can see all the different input forms. There's file uploader, and this will just trigger the user's own file manager from their computer or from their device to open up. They can choose something, and all we're doing right now is hiding the pop-up, but allowing that file uploader to maintain its value, maintain the file that was selected. If you hide it, it's still going to be there, just kind of behind the scenes. It's not going to clear for you, which is a concept that can be very useful for kind of behind the scenes or background calculations within inputs that you don't need the user to see. Can be helpful in certain cases, or just hidden variables. Bubble does have a custom state system for hidden variables, so it really just kind of depends on what's going to work best for your needs. I'm getting sidetracked now. So when we click attached, we hide the pop-up. If we click discard, it's going to hide the pop-up as well, but also reset the pop-up so that the file uploader clears. So we're discarding, completely wiping that out. The next time we show the pop-up, it's clean. If there is a value in that file uploader, we're going to see a piece of information under this input. Let's go into, we actually right click here, and I'm going to do a little shortcut here. You'll notice that I'm moving more into more shortcuts. Reveal the elements tree to pull it open here automatically, just kind of unravels everything for me. And here this hidden text would display this content here, file attached, and then we'll display the file uploader's value and then the file name. And this is hidden by default, okay, and it collapses down. The condition is going to make this text show if there is a value in the file uploader. So again, we close the pop-up, but if we didn't reset it, then it will hold its value, and then this text will display and it let the user know, okay, you've got a file attached. When we're ready to click send and create our new message, let's take a look at that workflow. It's in green here, because this is kind of the heart of the whole thing. We're going to create a new message record. So again, just to point out where that action is, that's under data here, create a new thing. Create a new message, save all of our inputs. So the actual content from our input, the attachment is coming from the file uploader. Again, not every message is going to have an attachment. If there isn't, then this is just empty, and that's okay. And we want to make sure that we relate the message to the thread. Again, this goes back to that relationship field. It's not a plain text or anything. It's a reference to the entire thread record. So as long as the structure of this field was set up where the type of field right here, just getting to it, is thread, then the value in this workflow can be a thread, right? Not, be very clear about this, not the thread's customer, not the thread's unique ID, not the thread's creation date, just the thread. This value is compatible with the format of the field. If I had gone to the thread's, let's say, unique ID, Bubble doesn't like that. It's going to say it's in red here, and it's going to reveal it in this issue checker. Saying, hey, your create a new message value should be a thread, but right now it's a text, right? The unique ID is a plain text. It needs to be a thread. So I'm going to remove the unique ID piece. A lot of people get confused because they'll see, oh, there are more options. I should keep going with my expression. No, not necessary. Those additional options are there because you could potentially have a different expression that you want to create, or you might be going through a record to get to another record, right? You're building off of your expression, kind of chaining things together. So Bubble's kind of giving you every possible route, but it doesn't mean that you have to just keep going until it ends, because it might never end. You might always find yourself with more possibilities. All we want is a thread value here. Now that's creating a one-to-one relationship from the message to the thread. Okay, so once we send the message, we attach all of those values, we reset the input so that it clears out, the file uploader is clear, And we again scroll to the new message just in case we were scrolled up, hit send, go back to that new message that was created. Okay, so there we have it. There is the messaging functionality. A lot of things built into a very clean design, a very comfortable and familiar design to make it easy for a user to just jump in, start typing away. There's nothing new to learn about this kind of configuration. It's a very common type of setup here. But you'll see that there's a lot that, goes into customizing an aesthetic like this, down to the roundness of your corners, down to the alignment, the positioning of your text, left, center, right, what information you want to display, what do you want to display conditionally. Okay, so there's a lot of logic around all of this for that to happen properly. All right, so now we're going to go into our shopping cart and checkout flow demonstration. This is going to be a collection of all of the things that we've looked at to this point. The functionality in here is also going to include an integration with Stripe so that you can see a quick way to get payments set up in your application. This is still really the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's what's possible on this platform. But it is the more sophisticated of all of our demonstrations because there's more data types involved, more related fields, more related records that need to communicate with each other. We have calculations happening. Like I said, we have the connection to Stripe. So I'm going to walk you through the designs, through the workflows, and also a front-end preview so you can see what the user will experience. This is from the perspective of the customer, and they first load the page. They are going to be met with an empty state design. Nothing has really started, but it doesn't look broken because we've got this nice little image here and an easy call to action button. Hey, click this to begin. So when they click on this button, what's happening in the background is a new order record is getting created, and that new order record is going to be remembered in a custom state. We haven't looked at custom states throughout this entire video. It is a more advanced type of feature that you can manipulate in many different ways. It's essentially a way for you to create a temporary value. So it's not something that's being saved to your database, although you could take the custom states value and save it to a record in your database, just like you can with input values, file uploaders, things like that. But the purpose of the custom state here is just to keep track of our parent order. As the user goes through and adds items to their order, it's going to modify that record, and we can ensure that it's always going to modify the right record. If I were to refresh the page, I start all over. The custom state is cleared. I need to create a new order. Okay, so as soon as I have an order, the custom state has a value, we're going to see this first group. Now I haven't added any selections here, so this is all that I see. The list of products have been set up in my database under the product table. So this would be something that me as the app owner, if this app is just for my own restaurant, I could manage, in an admin page somewhere. My users wouldn't have control over managing products, and I can create these items and their price. Or if I was building more of a SaaS application where my customers are multiple restaurants, right, multiple businesses, they create their own menus of products. So the database would have to link products to specific businesses. That way, when a customer of a specific business comes onto an order page, they're only seeing the menu of that restaurant that they had selected. So think any kind of online ordering, DoorDash type of thing or Uber Eats, where you have to select your items or you can select the restaurant, and they're all going to come from one database. That's one way to do it. Of course, you can use Bubble's sub-app system to have every restaurant on separate databases. But the idea is that you've structured your database to relate the products with the right business. For now, what we have is just one list of products, assuming that the app is built from the perspective of one restaurant only. So the customer can add quantity to certain items. So let's say I want one barbecue chicken. The moment I add that first line item, you can see here my order summary is going to appear and show me the total that I'm accumulating. If I wanted to add another barbecue chicken, right now when I modify the quantity, it is modifying the line item directly. The line item is unique to my order with this restaurant. This line item is unique to my order and more specifically with this product. The line item is going to have the quantity for that one product so that we can do a subtotal. If I add another product to my order, I'm creating a new line item with a quantity of 1. And so because the base price of that item is $5 times 1, it's still $5. If I add another one here, it's going to up the quantity, up the subtotal. So I am not modifying the products directly. I am modifying unique records for my own order. I'm going to add one more here. Okay, so we have 3 items. There's my total. It's just adding up all of the subtotals. And I can delete, an entire line item if I want. I don't want the barbecue chicken anymore. I just want the pepperoni and the margarita. All right. And again, I can still modify my quantities from here. Notice that there's a condition on the minus icon if I have 0, because I can't go into negative quantity. So I don't want to give the user the opportunity to make that mistake. I can always go up, but I can't go past 0. From here, if I'm ready to check out, it's going to now trigger a Stripe plugin action to generate a checkout page. So this is a checkout page that's actually hosted on Stripe, which is perfect because you want Stripe to handle all of the sensitive financial, transaction information. I'm currently logged in as this person and I've actually run through this page before, so it remembers the test card that I used, but I could change it and type in a different credit card number and make a payment. I'll show you right here. Let's actually just keep using this credit card. And I'm going to hit pay, but just keep an eye out. You see this title, pizza app checkout, there's my total, and it has listed out my items that I selected. If I click back, it's just going to cancel the transaction, just take me back where I came from. If I click pay, it will process the transaction. And if this was in a real live mode, in a live mode, it would actually process a real credit card and make the payment from there. So you can see when I came back, Bubble gave me a little alert message, your credit card was successfully charged. I do have control over that messaging. I also have control over not showing that and just showing my own design if I wanted. Okay, so I'll hit OK, and it just takes me back to where I started. So from here, of course, I could design other steps in the flow for the user to see a receipt, an order summary. We could send them an email, lots of different things we can do from here. So let me take you back into the editor so we can see how this all came together. There's 4 data types involved. First was the product table. So we could have a list of products with a name and a price. So if we go into the products list, there they are. The names and the base prices. That would be managed again by the business themselves. When the user first clicks on Start a New Order, a new order record is created. By default, the status will be in pending. I think that's going to be in the workflows, but we could also set up the default here so that every new order is set up as pending. And the order is going to update its running total. Every time we add a new line item, we'll update this value. We'll see that in the workflows as well. But every order is tied to a list of line items. So remember before, every message was tied to a related thread. The order is tied to a list of line items. Once the user selects a quantity of at least 1, they're going to create a line item. This is the unique combination between an order and a product. Okay, I am selecting a specific product for this order, and from here I can identify how many of this product I want so that I can do some math in the workflows to multiply my quantity by the product's price. Okay, I don't even need to have the product's price here. The product's price already exists in this record. So as long as my line item has a relationship to the product, I will know the price of that product, and I can multiply it by the quantity to get my subtotal. And from there, I can add up all the subtotals of my line items to get a final total for my order. The last data type we have here is a transaction data type. This would be created after the user comes back from Stripe, so that we have the amount that was paid, the order that it was for, and Stripe actually creates IDs for absolutely everything. So when a transaction happens, you have an ID for that payment. And so saving that to the database would be a smart thing to do for troubleshooting, just documentation purposes. So let's just take a look at the actual data that was generated from that shopping cart that I just created here. So let's start with the order. This was right here. This was my order. There was my total, $13.75. These are the 2 related line items. Remember, they're represented by their unique ID because line items are identified by their unique ID. but I could have them identified by products and make sure that the product is also identified by the name. Otherwise, I would just end up with the unique IDs of the products, which would not be helpful. So here I should see, there we go. There's my order with these two items. Under the line item, those are the two right here, two records with the quantity and the subtotal. You can see the unique ID of the parent order. These are the same because they both belong to the same order. And then finally, the transaction that was created after I came back from Stripe, the amount paid, the associated order, and then there's the Stripe charge ID. CH is the prefix for that one. So going over to the design, we have a primary group here, which is set up as a row layout style, right? Again, they're both centered, the items inside separated by 20 pixel gap spacing in between the two. And we have our two groups, right? On the left, we have choose items, which is, oh, sorry, I think that gap spacing was for the choose item. No, it was the same. I'm getting confused. All right, so this left group here is set up as a column, so things are stacked vertically. I can see some padding, right? 20 padding on the top and bottom, 10 on the left and right. And inside we have a reusable, a repeating group of our products. Let me open that up here so we can see it. There it is. Repeating group of our products, just searching for products, no constraints. But again, if this was more of a SaaS structure, I would constrain on the business, on the, on the restaurant, so that we only see that restaurant's products. And then inside we can display information about the product, the name, the price formatted as a currency. We've got a little custom design here to do this quantity. This is not an element that exists. This is actually made up of two buttons. Okay, a button with a minus and a plus label, and then an input so that the user can, oh, sorry, this is a text. My apologies, my mistake. This is a text that is just pulling from the database because the buttons are going to update the line item record in the database, and this text will simply display what has been saved to the database. So that way the user is actually not typing in their quantity, but they're pushing the buttons. You could absolutely use an input though to give them both options. They could click on the button or they can just type in a number that they want. So if they want to jump from 0 to 10 pizzas, big pizza party, they certainly can do that, okay? Let's see, and if the line item is empty, then it is going to be 0. It's not going to show anything. So if we check out the workflows here, I mean, you can see there's a bunch of conditions to, make it more faded out. It's not clickable if we don't have a line item, right? We don't want to go into the negative numbers. Let's take a look at the workflows for these particular buttons here. So let's do this one here first. If I click on the plus button and we do not have a line item for this product. Now notice that it's referencing the parent group's line item. Why might that be happening? Well, we need to search for an existing line item. And we're going to be doing these searches multiple times on the minus button, on the plus button, on the quantity. So we need to streamline them. These three elements right here live inside of a group. Let's go into the tree here. These three are inside of this group. Now this group is doing us a favor. It's searching for the line item for our order for this particular product, right? This sells product right here. And if there is a record that exists, then the group is going to have a data source. It will contain a line item. If it does not find that line item, that means we have not created anything yet, and it's going to be empty. The group source will be empty. So here's the condition again. If I click on plus and the parent group's line item is empty, then I know I'm safe to create a new line item. And I can save all the details here. By default, it's a quantity of 1. It's my first click of that plus icon. The associated product is going to be tied to the group's product. My subtotal at this point is simply the product's price because I'm only at a quantity of 1. The order is the custom state's value. I'm going to jump over there in a second so you can see how we set that custom state. But I'm referencing the custom state's value because that's where my order lives. Then I'm going to update the order. And I'm going to add this new line item to the order's list of related line items. Remember, that's the list field that we created. We have list operations here to modify lists. And from here, I'm then going to want to update my orders total. And because I have many different areas that could trigger an update to the total, I've consolidated these actions into a single workflow event so that I don't have to repeat actions multiple times. It's less room for error by streamlining things down, consolidating things down. So this is going to trigger a custom event here. This is another type of trigger you can create. And I've just labeled it update total. And the only thing that happens here is it recalculates the sum of the order, searching for line items for this order, taking each item's subtotal and then adding them up. If I do a plus when the line item is not empty, meaning I'm doing a quantity of 2 or more, then I'm going to update that line item and add to the existing quantity, whatever the quantity is now, plus 1. And I'm going to update the subtotal. So I'm basically taking the new quantity, right, whatever the quantity is now, plus 1, times the line item's product price. I'm just recalculating everything when I click on these buttons under certain conditions. And then I trigger my custom event again to recalculate the total, right? So both of these trigger one event to recalculate the total. This reduces error because if there's a mistake here, then I only need to make the change here, the correction. And I don't need to go check all of my different places where I could potentially be updating totals and they might be inconsistent. The minus icon is going to do a delete if we are at the last quantity. So if my quantity is currently 1, then we can go ahead and delete the line item fully. We don't need to keep it. So this is a delete action. If it is anything greater than or equal to 2, so you can see our conditions here, it's going to subtract the quantity and then recalculate the total or the subtotal and then trigger the update total event so that it can recalculate the master total, the grand total. Okay, let's quickly look at the workflow for when a new order is created. When that button is clicked, that was the first thing I did when I loaded the page. I created a new order. By default, the status is pending, and I'm going to save this order in a custom state. So we use an action here called set state. So this is under element actions, set state right there. So remember, a state is a temporary value. It's up to you to create your states and what kind of value you want to save to them. States, you can think of them as fields. They're just not in the database. They're on the page. So where you have fields on data types, states are on elements, okay? Our custom state right now that we're working with is on the page. The page is also considered an element. So if I open up this little inspector, I can get to any states I've created on this page. I can create multiple. So I've created a state called current order, and the value is going to be an order record. It's a reference to the entire object. You can see that I could also set states to be lists. You know, I can have multiple states. I can delete the states from here. This is a more advanced piece of functionality, but it gives you a lot of flexibility for manipulating values in real time, passing data around, kind of behind the scenes. So when the order is created, we're going to update the value of that state. We know the state lives on the page. It's possible to create states on other elements too. It just depends on how you want it to be organized. And the custom state that I want to modify is this one current order here. I could have other states if I wanted. And the value is simply the result of step 1. This is one of these dependent actions where I need to have the order created first, and then I can set the state and refer to the result of the previous step, which is my new record. That happens behind the scenes. The user doesn't really see any of this happening. They just see groups become visible because there's now a value in that custom state. So remember, this was the first group that appeared. And the condition here is when the page, that's the name of my page here, you can see cart demo, when the page's custom state, the name of the state is current order, is not empty, then we show this group. And then this group over here is based off of the line items. If our list of line items, which is a repeating group in here, has at least one item, then this becomes visible. So you notice that I'm leveraging whether things exist or not to know whether to show something or not. And I can reference other elements on the page. I could do searches in my database. I can reference inputs, custom states. Okay. So this repeating group over here on the right is going to be a list of, let me go into the parent, which is the repeating group. This is a list of our line items for this specific order. We, of course, don't want to see line items for other orders, so that constraint is very important there. And then we show all the details inside. The line items, products, name. Okay, so I'm going through the line item to get to the related product. That's a relationship field. And then to the product's name. Over here, we display the line item's quantity, which is just a number. And here we'll display the line item's subtotal, formatted as a currency. This icon is simply going to delete the line item. So that triggers a simple delete action, and it should recalculate the total. I think that's this one right here. Yeah, delete line item and calculate the total. You notice how like most of these workflows have to update the total. So that was very important to create this custom event to make that really efficient for us and safer. And this total text here is going to display the value from the record. It's the order's total formatted as a sum, as a currency. Most of these values, I think actually all of them, they're pulling from the database directly. Now you could also have these calculated in real time, just like we did with the expense and budget tracker. I wanted to do it this way so you can see a different approach. Okay. Now, the checkout button. This is talking to Stripe. We have an integration here. So the plugin that we're using is this one right here, Stripe. This is a Bubble published plugin. There's a lot of documentation around getting this set up, but basically when you have a Stripe account, you'll get keys, API keys that you can add to the plugin settings here. And you have a lot of different popular actions available to you: charging the user, collecting a credit card for paying later, creating subscriptions, all of that. So what we're going to be triggering here when we click on checkout is the charge the user action. And that's found under the payment list here, right? Here are all of the actions available. So we want to charge the user, and we'll basically just fill out the form just like we have with all of our other actions to see what we need. We're going to supply the email of the person paying, the total amount that they need to pay, the currency. We're going to have a name for the checkout. Remember in the description, I saw the list of pizzas that I had selected, and so that was defined here. I'm providing that dynamically through this expression. I'm taking my line items, products, names. Now, I had to say unique elements because it's possible that I have multiple, let's see, actually, if the line item is going to be tied to one product, we actually didn't need to do unique elements. That doesn't really hurt anything, but line items each, yeah, we didn't need to do that. I'm going to change this like this. If there's a possibility of a list expression showing duplicates, unique elements removes your duplicates. That's the only reason that was there. But I'm realizing now that every line item is tied to one product, so there would be no danger of having duplicates. A couple of other settings around charges. When this action runs, that's when the user is directed to that checkout page. When they come back, it's going to pick up with the workflow, and we have a internal transaction record. This is another data type to be created just for documentation. And we'll save all of the details, so we can take the result of step one, which is the Stripe action, and Stripe returns a number of details that we could capture and save to our database. So I'm just capturing the charge ID. I'm also relating it to the order and the amount that was paid. So I'm pulling this off of Stripe. You know, they also provided the amount back to us. I could have also gotten it from the order. Stripe actually returns amounts in the lowest unit of the currency. So if it was USD, it would return it in cents. And so I needed to divide by 100 just to have a whole dollar conversion for that. Update the order, change its status to paid, and clear out my custom state. You see, I leave this value empty now, which means that the groups are going to go away. It's going to start me over from the beginning. And I can begin a new order if I'd like. All right, that's a full checkout flow from start to finish with an interactive design so that the user can indicate what they're selecting, go into a checkout, and make a payment. When it comes to building a full application, you are putting something live on the internet. So there are things to be mindful of that go outside of the front-end designs that you're putting together, the logic that you're building into your workflows, and your database structure. You have to manage two different environments, a test environment and a live environment. You're going to be troubleshooting things. Bugs will come up. They need to be fixed. You need to know how to resolve those issues. You need to know how to maintain your application for the long term. Keep an eye on the performance, the app capacity that the app is using. So Bubble has a number of tools and resources available to you to monitor all of these things and to manage these different areas that your users might not necessarily be aware of, but you absolutely should. And I just want to run through them real quick so you understand what is available to you. The debugger is that tool that we saw in some of our demos that shows up on the front end preview. It helps you inspect your elements to understand behaviors of all of your settings. Sometimes you might not see what you thought you had designed, and the debugger can help you uncover why that might be. The responsive viewer, we also saw that as well, so that you can make sure that everything you're designing looks good on all the different breakpoints, all those screen sizes. So that's the other kind of toggle view that you get to within the design tab of your editor. Your issue checker was that little box in the upper right corner with a number count of however many issues you have. We opened it up a couple times to see if Bubble was flagging something, and basically that's when Bubble's going to tell you if something's not configured properly in your editor. Not necessarily anything to do with your custom flows or your user's market or anything like that, but more about technical functions that have not been set up properly. Maybe you might be missing a required value. Server logs, we didn't really touch on, but there is a section in your logs tab to monitor all activity that happens in your app. So anytime somebody makes a database change or clicks on a button, everything is getting recorded in those logs, and it's a really good resource for some deep troubleshooting. Depending on the plan that you're on is going to dictate how far back in the logs you can go. Version control is very necessary whenever you are deploying your app and you have multiple versions of your application. So this way, if you ever need to revert your application back to a previous state, for example, maybe you introduced a new feature too early, it was buggy, and you need to kind of go back so that your live users aren't interrupted, you can always revert back to a previous point in time. And Bubble has different resources for you to keep track of your different versions with timestamps and all of that. Again, depending on the plan that you're on with your Bubble app, that's going to dictate how far back you can go and do that kind of revert. Data copying. Because you have two separate environments, you will have two separate databases. You can copy data between the two databases. There's a lot of strategy around doing that. In some cases, you might never need to do that. In other cases, it might be a frequent occurrence, and you can go in either direction. So just be careful when you copy data, but this can be found in the app data section of your editor. Deployment and save points, I touched on this a little bit, but whenever you are ready to go live or push a new version of your development over to the live version, Bubble has tools for you to do that. And you can also create save points, which are basically bookmarks, a way for you to bookmark dates and times whenever a big feature or a big change happen in your editing of the application. Save points do not deploy your application. They're just a way for you to keep track of time. Connecting to a domain. So of course, if you're going live with a custom application, you're likely going to want to be on your own domain rather than Bubble's hosted domain that you get initially when you create your app. So regardless of who your domain host is, by the way, you do need to buy a domain separately. Bubble does not sell domains. You'll enter in your domain into the settings, and Bubble will give you instructions on how to connect your domain to your domain host. Because of the custom domain functionality, you'll also be able to send emails using Bubble's built-in email functionality from your own domain. There's also a couple steps there to get that set up properly. Bubble has a built-in connection with SendGrid to do that. If you want SendGrid to manage your email sending functionality, you can also connect with other services if you prefer to use a different platform for that. Now, of course, like I mentioned, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. Everything that we went through here covered more of the core fundamentals, the core concepts you have to understand in order to get started with a Bubble app. Remember, the three pillars are the major ones: your database, your design, and your workflows. Those three things together will address all of the different components of a functioning, interactive, data-driven application. There are many other advanced capabilities available to you, so depending on the type of app that you're building or the users that you're working with, you might be taking advantage of some of these things. So I wanted to just touch on a few popular ones in terms of advanced features. API connections. This is actually one of the most powerful pieces of functionality that the Bubble platform offers, is the ability to connect to the outside world via API. So the Stripe integration was a very simple one because it went through a plugin, but you can also do a manual connection to Stripe using Bubble's API connector. any service that offers an API connection, you will most likely be able to connect to it with the API connector. It covers basically standard setups for APIs, standard authorization methods as well. Bubble also has a plugin that lets you connect to SQL databases. So if you have an external SQL database with all of your content and you'd prefer to grab data from there rather than pull data into the Bubble database, or maybe do a combination of both, there is a connection tool for that as well. Backend workflows is not something that we touched on during this video, but it's another very powerful section to create background workflows. So the user doesn't necessarily need to be present in your application for something to run server side. Backend workflows are a great way for you to create recursive workflows, so things that run on a loop. For example, sending an email every Monday with a summary of the latest to-dos or the things that are coming up. Or creating a lot of data on a loop in a recursive fashion. In general, just being able to manage big bulk changes to your database is generally going to be done in a backend workflow, especially for performance. You can also have external services trigger your backend workflow. So it's kind of the reverse in terms of the API connection. This is often known as webhooks. So if something happens on an external site, they can notify your application like a real-time app-to-app notification system with that information. And from there, you can do whatever you want. Send somebody an email, update your own database. Very powerful section for both connecting to the outside world, but also running more advanced operations in your own internal application. Custom states, so we touched on that just a little bit in our last demo, but that was honestly kind of a really, really basic use case of a custom state. They're really popular for manipulating visual interactions with your users, again, because they're temporary. They're not saved forever in your database. They're really handy for doing calculations, for just passing data around. There's a lot of specific niche kind of interaction functionality that can leverage custom states to make them work really well. In addition to all these kind of built-in features, you can add your own custom actual code to your Bubble apps as well. Currently, you can add your own CSS, you can upload your own fonts, you can add HTML code. There's actually an HTML element in the design tab, and JavaScript as well. So if you have any requirements to have some custom code for that, depending on the language, of course, if it fits within one of these categories, you should be able to do that. Also keep in mind that you can build custom plugins for yourself that are more JavaScript based as well, where it's private to your application. It does not need to be listed publicly in the marketplace. You can, of course, import and export your data. Your data is yours. Bubble does not own it. So there are some actions both in the workflows to export data to CSV or just directly as an app admin through the editor in the back end. You can upload via CSV, map all of your fields there, or modify with a new CSV file. And there's also plugins and other strategies you can take to allow your users to upload their data to your application, especially if you're working within a SaaS environment. We've seen that very common functionality where the platform wants to allow companies to maybe bring in their own customer lists or product lists. That all happens through custom workflows that you have to build out step by step, but capability is absolutely there. Sub-app systems for SaaS products. So we touched on this earlier at the beginning of this video, but this is a platform that can support that type of structure, where if your clients, your customers need to be on their own dedicated databases, their own instances of your app, sub-app system is the way to do that. You do need to be on a higher plan in order to enable that capability, and there are some things to think about there. It's more of an involved process to get that up and running. We always recommend starting with one app first to get things off the ground, get the feedback you need, but that's certainly a system that you can grow into. There's a lot more that you can leverage here. I would say that, honestly, the most powerful capability is you. You are the one that is putting together all of the logic. You have the tools and resources available to you to combine everything in the way that you need.
Your next step from here is to take what we've covered today and combine it with the right development methodology. Because being able to think like a programmer as you use Bubble is critical to actually launching your app. Head over to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop right now. Don't wait, and join our additional free workshop that'll pair these Bubble tactics with the methodology and strategy you'll need to successfully launch your app.